I have this feeling, man, because there's a handful of people actually run everything. That's true. It's provable. It's not I'm not a conspiracy nut. It's provable. Handful, very small elite run and own these corporations, which include the mainstream media. I have this feeling who's ever elected president, like Clinton was, no matter what their promises you promise on the campaign trail, blah, 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 when you win, you go into this smoky room with the 12 industrialists, capitalist scum who got you in there, and you're in this smoky room, and this little film screen comes down, and a big guy in a cigar, roll the film. And it's a shot of a Kennedy assassination from an angle you've never seen before. It looks suspiciously off the grassy knoll. And then the screen goes up, and the lights come up, and they go to the new president. Any questions? Just what my agenda is. First we bomb Baghdad. You got it.
You know what? Here's my actual true, I've had a vision. And what it is even though this is a world where good men are murdered in their prime and mediocre hacks thrive and proliferate, I've got to share this with you because I love you. And you feel that. You know all that money we spend on nuclear weapons and defense every year? Trillions of dollars, correct? Trillions. Instead, if we spent that money feeding and clothing the poor of the world, which it would pay for many times over, not one human being excluded, not one, we could, as one race, explore outer space together in peace forever. You've been great. Thank you.
This is Bristol. It's Friday, it's 5 o'clock, 5 past, and welcome to Not the BCFM Politics Show on Friday the 8th of November 2024, streaming live from the Eastone Studios in Bristol, one of several Templar ports. Still Templar ports, yes, like Edinburgh, London, all these places like La Rochelle in the Empire of Lies. At least that's what Vladimir Putin called it when they invaded Ukraine. We're live on the talkradio.org.uk, stream at radioquk.com in Camberley, Surrey, DJ Plug Radio in Nuneaton, Warwickshire, and live on the Not the BCFM Politics Show app, which is available free from APK Pure or Apple. And also, I will be putting a link up on our show page later on to the actual app itself, because the Google people have tried to stop. Well, they've stopped people having been able to download our app. Isn't that lovely of them? And of course, that's nothing to do with the fact that they are controlled by the fascists and the deep state in America. Google, is it? So anyway, I'm Tony Gosling. Thank you for turning off the psycho in the corner, gaslighting us with its military-grade, zero-trust agenda psyops, boring us to tears with irrelevant distractions, lying through their teeth and puff pieces on the conspirators, and hatchet jobs on the heroes. McCarthyite witch hunts going after anyone with influence who speaks up for humanity and against World War III and wage slavery. For those with eyes to see and ears to hear, the so-called solutions to every crisis, whether it's Gaza, Ukraine, COVID, migrants, prisons, farming, cost of living, NHS, climate, twisted Armageddonist, accelerationist policies crafted to make every crisis worse. And the politicians have nothing to say. So, meanwhile, wife-murdering pantheist Wef King Tampon Charlie and vampire queen Carmilla wage war on the British people together with China, Russia and the BRICS. And they I should rephrase that, shouldn't I? Because they are waging war on the BRICS. There's not the BRICS, China and Russia waging war on us. Through the panda-eyed energy saboteur Secretary Ed Miliband. Anyway, it's not the end of the world. Or is it? Helping us navigate the accelerationist Fourth Reich matrix, it's Irish Republican Labour activist Martin Summers, and joining me in the studio is Andy Hudd, who is one of 3 deputy leaders of George Galloway's Workers' Party, and he's also Vice President of ASLEF. We'll be looking also a bit later on at Forgetfulness Sunday, which is where all of the people that died in previous wars, trying to get rid of tyranny, etc., now seem to forget everything that they're supposed to have learned. And that's funny, a whole generation has disappeared and died since the Second World War. And now everything's being just rewritten as if history, you can do that, just tear it up in a very Orwellian style. Also, obviously, looking at the results of the US election and listening to a few of Donald Trump's rather. I always like listening to the rallies that he does. I mean, he's obviously a bit of an exception to most of them, but the rallies that he's done just before the result and just before, he goes a little bit more extreme and he says a few more extreme things. So we'll be hearing some of those. A little bit later in the programme. Anyway, Iranian and Russian news censored in the UK by the telecoms cartel, and then Ofcom. Us cancelled off even little Bristol Community FM by the Bristol Mafia, and from PRSC by the Trans Lobby, but we're still here, just about, folks. Anyway, Andy, we'll start with you. Do you want to just say something about the Workers' Party generally and what makes it different to other political parties? Now, you've got no MPs. You did have an This is the bizarre thing about the election, isn't it? You had one MP, George Galloway, before the general election, back in July, and now you don't have any.
No, that's right. No, we did have Big George, and he ran for election, won a good campaign, and the last general election we won 154 candidates across the UK. And we got 206,000 votes, which makes us now the sixth largest party in the country. But, yeah, we didn't return an MP, which is a bit of a problem. Well,
another problem, of course, is the media coverage, the press coverage. I mean, for example, there were physical attacks on some of your supporters as they were going house to house, which got virtually no press coverage at all, which I would have hoped that that's the sort of thing the press would be thinking this is quite a serious story. If you're getting people canvassing door to door in the streets who are then being, assaulted, this should make the news, but it really hardly did.
Yeah, that's right. We had a child who was out canvassing with their father and was attacked. They were both attacked with a baseball bat. They managed to get away. We had a canvassers charged that by a car, and one was hit and put into hospital. But of course, you wouldn't have seen those things. They only report anything negative about us if it's in their favour.
Now, you've spent a lifetime pretty much in the trade union movement. How would you sum up the way the press deals with the left generally? Because George Galloway obviously is a genuine left, and although many would argue, probably Martin too, that Keir Starmer is just as much right as he is probably more right than he is left. But so what about what's your experience of the press dealing with your activities over the years?
I mean, yeah, it's always biased and it's always reported in we're always reported in a bad light. I mean, if you look at the trade union activities we've been doing over the years, they're always reported on negatively. I mean, the recent pay deal that train drivers got, for example, was so say at the expense of pensioners, when of course that's not related at all. But, I think every socialist party's work, I mean, a true socialist party, I think the establishment see and fear that. And of course I think if they let the ideas of socialism permeate the establishment or at least political discourse in the media, I think I don't think they'll be able to control it. So we've always kind of worked with one arm tied behind our backs, but.
Is there anything much in the world of socialist media? Obviously, we're quite we are socialist leaning. Both Martin and I are socialists. I'm a Christian socialist. Martin's more of a Marxist leaning socialist. But is there anything out there? Do you think?
Well, the onset of social media, and I mean, and I'm not a part of that. It used to be, but your WhatsApps, TikTok, and stuff like that. I think what's happened is you can get your news from anywhere now. So people, if they've got the inquisitive mind, they can go and find out what they wish. And I think one of the things we say in the Workers' Party is that we don't want to tell you how to think, what to think. Sorry, we want to tell you how to think. And I think if we're getting people that going out and researching and fact checking everything they hear in the mainstream media, what they normally do is gravitate towards, socialist ideas. And I think that's a major sea change, I say, within the last 10, maybe 15 years.
But BBC have got their own fact checkers. Mariana Spring has got a little office that sort of seems to be suspended by a wire at the top of the BBC newsroom, checking everything.
Yeah, well, they don't trust us to do it ourselves, do they? And not a lot of people know, but when the Tory government got rid of Russia Today off the airways, supported by Keir Starmer, by the way, remove Russia Today as if, no one in the country could actually watch it and make their own minds up. Or watch a selection of channels and make their own mind up, because that's what I've been doing ever since I've been involved with trade unions and politics, really, because you don't get the straight answer from the mainstream media. And also, the other danger with mainstream media is that you talk to people who think like you, which is also a danger. You don't want to do that either.
Something that's been quite hilarious this week has been watching the BBC and other broadcasters, Martin, saying how surprised they are that Donald Trump's going and what a sort of terrible thing it is, and what a shame it is. And they're trying to sort of say, well, the American people have just got it wrong.
Well, I think what we've seen, and I've been obviously checking lots of different views about what's been happening. The liberal establishment in the West are very, very unhappy at this development. And of course they had their own opinion polls which suggested it was neck and neck in order to try and, basically push Kamala Harris over the line.
No, you're right. Actually, for at least a week before the election, the broadcasters were all saying the same. Neck and neck, neck and neck. It wasn't at all.
Well, no, I mean, what happened in the end is that the Democratic vote is lower, much lower than it was for Biden. In fact, suspiciously lower, because the Biden vote the last time was suspiciously high. Yes. But the point is that
20 million votes extra.
Well, I mean, if you look at it, you will see that the actual core vote of the Democrats has wobbled around a bit. But then, when it was Obama and it was, in theory, Biden got a lot more than Obama, which I find hard to believe. But anyway, Kamala Harris was back on the same sort of level as Obama got. But of course it wasn't, she'd gone down a bit in terms of votes. And,
what they're doing is quite cheeky, isn't it, really? Because there are various polls out, and the big broadcasters pick the polls that reflect what result they want, which was
that's right,
neck and neck. And it wasn't nothing like that in reality.
No, I mean, then of course the same thing happened in Venezuela, where the Western-oriented pollsters were claiming that there was going to be an overwhelming victory for the right wing, and of course what wasn't the case at all. And the same thing happened in Georgia, and the same thing happened in Moldova. So, in other words, one of the things that they do is they put out what are essentially fake polls in order to be able to claim that they've been cheated when it comes down to it. But anyway, what's clearly happened is a lot of the Democratic base either voted third party or stayed home. And that's what got Trump over the line. And of course, he's actually got previously when he was elected, he didn't win the popular vote. He won through the Electoral College, but this time he's won both popular vote, Electoral College. They've got control of the Senate. It looks like they're going to have control of the House as well. So it's a clean sweep. And the problem for the so-called left in the US is they're not left enough to, they can't challenge him on the basic stuff. And therefore they're left with just personal insults and all the rest of it.
Back to the Workers' Party a bit. Andy, you're talking about now trying to form various little groups within the Workers' Party, which is a relatively new party, working with veterans.
Yeah, so I'm a veteran. I've done 9 years in the Royal Navy, believe it or not. That's why I'm so disciplined. And we've got people in the party who are former veterans, and we're anti-war and we're anti-NATO, but we respect our servicemen and women because they're lions led by donkeys, and I know it's an old catchphrase, but it seems to be true, and we respect them for what they do. And what we want to try and do is recognise their contributions in the first instance, but also look at the problems that they're having, when they come out of the service, mental health issues, homelessness, they can't find a job, educational opportunities are not there for them. And so we wanted to develop policy around that. So we set up a veterans group, which I'm, currently sit on with a few others. And we're starting to now develop policy, to put forward to our next Congress, which is, next year. So, yeah.
What about just generally on the economy? Because, one of the criticisms of Trump, for example, has been I was listening to one, and we're going to hear it later. One of these, he's talking about the migrants as animals. He talks about them as, that's not the only, I think, barbarians, this sort of thing. these are the sort of words he uses to describe migrants. And he's painting this picture of basically people coming out of jails in Central and South America and other parts of the world and coming in as migrants to the United States. This is a hot potato, isn't it? Particularly with the small boats going on across the channel.
Yeah, I mean, he would more narrow that down to illegal immigrants, because of course I think that was one of the campaign faux pas he made, wasn't it? With one of his friends, I forget the name of now, with reference to Puerto Rico. But you know, the Workers' Party, you know, we're common sense socialists, so, you know, we kind of liken ourselves to what Labour used to be in the good old days, but, you know, we're socially conservative, with a small c. You know, there's some areas that we'd like to change socially. But with, regards to immigration, well, we want planned immigration. You know, we want to control that so that because the whole idea, as most of your listeners will know, is that with socialism and a Marxist economy, it's got to be planned, because that way you plan for the whole of society and the betterment and everybody. And you can't really plan that if, you know, you've got lots of people coming in that you can't account for, you can't build hospitals for. So we'd have a system to control immigration, but we certainly wouldn't stop immigration. We'd welcome it. We just want immigration in the right places so that we can build the economy.
Martin, are migrants good for the economy?
It depends which migrants you're talking about, doesn't it? I mean, some migrants are clearly, you know, positive for the economy because they've got skills and they contribute. A lot of the younger people...
But don't they push other people out of work?
Well, not necessarily. If you've got a planned economy and everybody's in work... If you
we don't have a planned economy.
No, we don't. And in actual fact,
we have a free market economy.
Yeah, yes.
So it's a big if, that.
Well, it is a big if, isn't it? And the other problem is, if you're going to go to war in places like Libya... A war of choice, smashing what was an established socialist-oriented state, and then you've opened up the whole of Africa and anybody from the Middle East. And don't forget, we invaded Afghanistan, Iraq. All these places are not that far away. I used to be an aid worker in Bosnia and Yugoslavia. That's not that far away. That's literally a 2-hour plane ride away. And it's all a lot closer to us than it is to the United States of America. But we've invaded all of these nearby countries, wrecked these countries. Syria has been wrecked. British Special Forces has been inside Syria, working with Al-Qaeda to overthrow the government there.
But it doesn't mean to say you've got to let people into the country.
No, it doesn't mean you've got to let people into the country.
Illegally, does it?
No,
or even legally.
No, but what it
these
does,
are two separate issues, really.
They're not two separate issues, Tony, because ultimately what we've got now is we're on the verge of World War III, and world wars lead to loads and loads of refugees. That's what happens.
Well, World War III hasn't started yet.
Oh, it has. It has, and the refugees are already being generated by that. We should not have gone to war in Afghanistan or in Iraq or any of these other places. And
well,
at the time,
hang on, because we're letting in lots of migrants, just voluntarily.
We're not letting lots of migrants.
We are, yeah, to do care work and things like this. This isn't World War III, is it?
No, the biggest increase in migrants has been people to work in the health service and social services, because local people can't afford to work for that kind of money, right? That's the reality.
But it's not World War III, is it? It
is World War. If you're in Gaza now, it's World War III. Tony.
It's not World War III that's causing the need in our care homes for migrant workers.
Well, in other words, Tony, we've got to separate out the people that are coming in here on work visas to fill roles that are already there to be filled, because we don't spend,
because there's such low pay.
That's right, and we could increase the pay and get people locally to do those jobs, but to do that we'd have to increase taxes on wealthy people, which we can't do.
Andy,
in the 1950s the top rate of tax in this country was 96%.
Andy,
and then we could afford to pay decent wages in the health service.
This whole business of migration and illegal and legal migration is a real hot potato, as Martin's just explaining there. Is what's the Workers' Party policy on it? You say it's okay to have measured migration, or
yeah. Well, we'd control it. I mean, I don't know how old you are, but my father tells me the story that he said, I nearly went to Australia. He said for £10. Right, because he was a heavy goods vehicle driver. They needed heavy goods vehicles in Australia, so he felt like going. And I imagine that a similar scheme would operate in the UK. That's about the controlled migration. We if we're finding a shortage of workers or skills, then we would get them in.
Well, that's right. 50s and 60s in this country, there were loads of people that went to jobs out in what was the Commonwealth or this sort of the remnants of the empire. Some of them didn't last long. If they went out in the 1960s, just for a few years, they'd be back again.
What? I mean, that to us, that's not the optimum option. What we'd like to do is get people trained up in our own country to do the jobs that are vacant. And I think that's what's happened. We had a big drive for people going to university for years on end, and I think it went up to its highest ever. But of course, we haven't got the plumbers or the electricians or the engineers. You know, we haven't got those people in society that can do that. HGV drivers, for example, and stuff like that. And of course, our membership of the European Union, which had the freedom of movement, which the liberal left exalted as being nice and fluffy, that we can go around Europe and do nice things, when in fact, of course, it was for capitalists to exploit the movement of working people by undermining terms, conditions and wages in the parent country even. So we got the hang up from that as well, and we've got a dearth of skilled people in this country.
Well, it's also wages in this country. So, I mean, your area of work is in the railways. Actually, the rail unions are pretty strong. They've managed to keep wages reasonably high. In fact, there's this long-running dispute with people like Mick Lynch and your union, which has done that. But many industries, like care work, just simply haven't managed to cope, and the wages have been driven down and down. As that industry, if you can call it that, care, is it an industry? No, not really. It's just looking after people, has been privatised, and more private companies have moved into that sector, so the wages have been pushed down and down.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. I mean, those things. I mean, you asked me earlier about, what are the Workers' Party about? Well, the common sense socialism element of that is that, those things like social care, health service, transport, housing, all of those things should be out of private hands and into public hands, so that you can basically manage it and control it economically. There should be no profit in social care. And it's that drive for profit that has pushed down wages and, turned the social care system into what it is today. It's
horrible, actually, what it is today, and it doesn't exist in a lot of places now. Like Bristol's one of them. It's very, very difficult to get state funded social care at all. So the whole thing has been a bit of a disaster. This is why I rather like the idea of a mixed economy. Anyway, staying on the subject of migration, there's a guy called Simon Elmer, and he's part of this Stop the Boats group. So let's have a listen to, and we'll go straight to Martin at the end of this to see what you make of Simon.
We've got this sort of discourse here called Stop the Boats. You might have heard of it.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Every time immigration comes up in Parliament or the media or anywhere else, it gets divided into this very silly discourse of, are you racist or are you not racist? And if you're not racist, you're against, you want to let people in. If you are racist, you want to stop the boats. And there's this perception that the people coming into the country are coming in illegally, that they're coming through these small boats which come over from Calais in France, and they kind of land on these beaches. And there's a lot of footage going around of this being seen all the time. And it creates this perception in the British public, has created it, that somehow this is something illegal. This is something which is out of our control. This is something that governments need to get a kind of a hold on with new legislation and tough powers. That is not what's happening at all. Last year, about 80,000 immigrants came to this country on as asylum seekers. 423,000 came on work permits and with their dependents, and about another 389, I haven't got the figures right before me here, came on study permits as well. Now, most of the people studying here, they seem to be returning. Not all of them, but a lot of them return to the countries they've come from. They get an education here and then go back. Well, at least they get a certificate of education anyway. But the people coming here on work permits, they stay here. And we've also got, I think last year we had about 75,000 family members of immigrants who had already come here, coming over to join them. So this is not something which is out of the government's control. This is not something which is happening illegally. It's not something that, border police need to get tough on. This is UK policy. And it would appear from the UN document that it's policy which is being set by these transnational technocracy, who is telling us how many people we need to have into this country in order to maintain this balance of between a working population and a retired population, but also between a working population and the profits of the people employing them. Now, the trouble with this... Sorry, go on.
No, okay. I was going to say, and the political establishment is prepared to follow that policy and completely change the face of the country. It seems incredible.
Well, at the current levels, by 2015, the native population of the UK, people born here, will undoubtedly be a minority in their own country. Yeah. And I think that's going to happen across most Western countries, because it seems that this is the UN document. What I think is interesting is, this is a United Nations document. A lot of people have seen it, and it corroborates this idea, this among Western countries, that the people are being replaced in their own country. Now, you've probably heard of this. I'd heard of it as well. That there's something called the Great Replacement.
Yeah,
and
heard of that.
It's denounced on Wikipedia as, this is the quote, as a white nationalist far-right conspiracy theory. It turns out it's not a conspiracy theory at all. It's actually a United Nations policy. Well, let me just get this. There's, despite the evidence of this, the evidence both of the document itself and that it's this which is determining UK and also Western immigration policy, in March of this year, the UN, so the same body that published this and is implementing this, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, he's an Austrian lawyer called Volker Turk. He was personally appointed to the position by the UN Secretary General. He described the Great Replacement theory as a conspiracy theory. We've heard that again, obviously. Yeah. But he also went on to call it delusional, racist, as a war on woke, as a war on inclusion. And he also said, and this is the really threatening point, this is where he joins hands with Keir Starmer, who himself, of course, is a lawyer. He says it directly influences perpetrators of violence. So you and I, by talking about this idea, which is not an idea, but which is a policy, which the data supplied by the governments back up, we, by discussing this, are perpetrating violence. And he finally asserted that, something which is not true, that multiculturalism is the history of humanity. In the UK, the kind of levels of, well, not now, but even when immigration began to increase to large numbers, didn't begin until 1948. And even then, it was kind of tiny figures to what we're seeing now. The dangerous thing, I think, for us is the sort of rhetoric describing what is obviously a policy document. Well, this man is lying. He's quite clearly lying. And yet he's one of the most senior lawyers in the United Nations. That's the sort of rhetoric used to hearing from, people on demonstrations holding up placards saying, refugees welcome here, we must smash the far right, anyone who opposes immigration is a racist. But this is being repeated by a very senior jurist at the United Nations. And I think the fact that he's basically making a veiled threat, or not so veiled threat, that anyone who discusses this is inciting violence and therefore can be arrested on a charge of hate crimes and prosecuted under this legislation. I think this is a measure of how much the people behind this, the United Nations and also the national governments which are implementing it, how forcibly they want to bury this document and bury these ideas. And it's for that reason that it's very important that we talk about them. This is policy, it is happening. And the thing about this UN paper is it's, as I said, I described it as an accountant's balancing act to address the threat to the profits of the international corporate sector. It doesn't take account of the cultural, social, and political consequences of mass immigration to such an extent that native populations are actually going to be replaced in their own country in a very short period of time. And that's what's the fallout we're seeing now.
So that's Simon Elmer speaking. His group is not called Stop the Boats. Look, that's just what he's talking about. But that was from Reality Check Radio, which is well worth a listen. They even had me on there last week. This, which is based in New Zealand, there's a whole load of people who used to work in mainstream media in New Zealand, and some of them still do, but they've got a sort of 24/7 channel out there. And his actual organisation, Martin, is called Architects for Social Housing. on talking about UN replacement policy. So what he's saying is it's nothing to do with World War III. It's actually to do with corporate profits and driving wages down.
Well, I'm familiar with the argument. It's quite interesting because in New Zealand you've got a right-wing government now, and they've put a law forward to try and abrogate the Treaty of Waitangi, by which the Maori community made peace with the Pakeha community in the 19th century. The Maoris are up in arms about it because they are the original community there. Everybody in New Zealand, apart from the Maori, are in fact incomers.
So do you think all those white people should leave New Zealand?
I don't, but I think they need to think very hard about what their rights are in relation to people coming into New Zealand, because then, of course, the real indigenous population aren't white at all.
So what has this got to do with wages here in Britain?
Well, okay, let's talk about wages and the economy about all of this. One of the problems in developed countries is that people aren't having kids. I haven't got any kids, Tony. You haven't got any kids. I don't think Dave's got any kids. Have you got any kids?
No.
Now, the problem is if we don't have any kids, there's not going to be anybody coming forward to pay the wages into, so you've got to find somebody to do that.
It's funny.
Otherwise, you've got to accept a loss in your standard of living.
Just a little anecdote is, I was chatting to one of my relatives about my great-great-grandmother, yesterday, and I didn't realise that she had 15 children.
That's right.
So this is back in between the wars. Oh, it's actually around about the time of the First World War.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're having a problem
15 kids.
They're having a problem with this in China as well, because of course they had a one-child policy for everybody for a long time, including Communist Party leaders. They had to set an example. And now, of course, as China becomes more middle class, they don't want to have kids. And therefore they have one, and some people don't want any at all. Now, and the same has happened in Japan, where, of course, once women get married in Japan, they train them up, and they're quite skilled, but as soon as you get married, you're supposed to stay home and look after the kids. But that means you've actually trained people, and they don't actually use the training that you've given them. Now, what they really need to do is bring in some nannies and au pairs from neighbouring countries, but that would then start to dilute the Japanese population. But, of course, if you don't bring in people like that, your economy starts to go down because it just shrinks. And if it shrinks, everybody's poorer. Now, if everybody wants to live in a homogenous society, they've got to accept that their living standards will have to go down. If they want to live in a more prosperous society, they've got to actually muck in with everybody else. And of course, a lot of people came to Britain after the war because they were invited here. Enoch Powell went to Jamaica and recruited people to work on London transport. That's what he did, because they couldn't find people to do it.
But then he did his famous speech,
The Indian Army, we're talking about veterans earlier, the Indian Army was decisive in 2 world wars in this country. They fought with us against Nazism. And the Indian Army...
I thought the Russians won that.
Well, but the Indian Army also fought the Battle of Impal Kohima in India, and also, of course, Normandy beaches. The Indian Army went ashore there. And, of course, if you go down into the centre of Bristol, you will see the memorial to all the Sikhs that died in World War II.
I think it's a bit of a stretch to say the Indian Army won World War II.
I'm just saying that they participated. And, of course, when Paul Weller got rich... There's a cemetery up the road from where he was brought up, which was full of Muslims who died in the trenches in the First World War. They came from India to fight in France so that we could have this conversation.
Really? I think that's what First World War was about.
Well, all right, maybe the First World War was about, but they came, and that's why they're here. Yeah? And of course, Britain had an empire. That's why all these people are here now.
So they're not here to drive wages down then?
No,
they're not here at the behest of big corporations.
No, the big corporations, what big corporations want is they want them here, but they want them here illegally. Which is why, of course, they didn't extend, at one stage, the big capitalists in Germany were quite happy to have a Czech Republic nearby, but we don't want them in the EU, we want them coming in illegally. Because we'd rather do that than have them coming in legally.
It's interesting.
What's happened in terms of what's happened since Brexit, in terms of who's been coming in, is that instead of white people coming in from Poland, we've got people coming in from we've got people coming in from the former empire who, in actual fact, they're brown skinned, but they speak better English. Yeah? So there you go.
Look, it certainly isn't just from the former empire. It's lots and lots of places.
The whole world.
Anyway, you mentioned Enoch Powell. I didn't realise, and it's interesting to hear from you that he was actually behind immigration.
That's right. He was the transport minister.
He changed his tune, didn't he? He was a minister. Yeah. And I think he was sacked for the Rivers of Blood
yes,
speech.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Because he said, well, hang on a minute, we're doing all this migration, but it's a really... So I've got a little clip of Enoch Powell. I mean, we love, people like him. Gosh. I mean, certainly when I was growing up, he was considered to be a racist. Is he a racist, do you think?
Yes.
Andy?
I would say so.
Anyway, let's have a listen to racist...
He wanted to keep India in the empire. He hated the whole idea of Indian independence.
But you can't keep India in the empire if India is leaving.
In the Roman Empire, Tony, if you were a Roman citizen, you could go anywhere in the empire. Yeah, that was the whole point. That's what made the Roman Empire what it was. So you had emperors who came from Spain, who weren't Romans at all. Yeah?
Yes.
Well, there you are. I'm just saying that's what empires are like.
Well,
people get to travel around them because they're empires.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, in those days, certainly, but Britain's empire's long gone. Anyway, let's have a listen to...
The City of London is still extracting resources from...
Well, there is colonialism still going on, but Britain hasn't had an empire.
There was a whole question at the Commonwealth Conference, Tony, about whether there should be reparations for slavery.
Britain hasn't had an empire since between the two world wars. I don't know why you think they still have.
Neo-colonialism still exists,
but it's not an empire, Martin.
It is an empire.
So people don't travel around within a non-empire, do they? Well, let's have a listen to Enoch Powell and see what he has to say. I'm not sure the whole of this... I was looking at it the other day, just trying to see what did he say. I don't think the whole of the speech was recorded, but anyway, he lost his ministerial job as a result of this.
It almost passes belief that at this moment, 20 to 30 additional immigrant children are arriving from overseas in Wolverhampton alone every week. And that means 15 or 20 additional families a decade or so hence. Here is their means of showing that the immigrant communities can organize to consolidate their members, to agitate and campaign against their fellow citizens, and to overawe and dominate the rest. The discrimination and the deprivation, the sense of alarm and of resentment lie not with the immigrant population, but with those among whom they have come and are still coming. This is why to enact legislation of the kind before Parliament at this moment is to risk throwing a match onto gunpowder. In these circumstances, nothing will suffice but that the total inflow for settlement should be reduced at once to negligible proportions, and that the necessary legislative and administrative measures should be taken without delay.
It was 1968, that speech. I don't know quite how they managed to overlay various types of music over it. That's probably people who've edited it since. But he changed his tune, didn't he? And also, it's quite amusing to hear him say 20 to 30 a week. Of course, it's a lot more than that today. It's something like 750,000 every year.
Well, he's talking about 20 to 30 a week in Wolverhampton, yeah, which is actually where my family are from originally, on my dad's side. Well, I mean, the thing is, he was a big imperialist. I remember reading about him. He was a very clever chap, and very well read, and all the rest of it. And he said, he cried when he heard that India had been given independence. He really hated the whole idea of it. The whole empire's going down the drain. But when he
probably wasn't the only one, was he?
Well, he wasn't the only one.
People who were wedded to empire. Well, a lot of people I know were actually born in the empire, parts of the empire.
That's right. And of course, when he was Minister of Transport after the war, he had to, they needed people to come and work in transport. So the minute the London Transport advertised in Kingston, Jamaica, to say, can people come to the mother country to work? And they did. And of course, their descendants are living amongst us now. And of course, at one stage, we saw Theresa May trying to, send people who'd been living in this country for years back to Jamaica because they hadn't regularised their position, and it led to a bit of an outcry. Now, all of these things are going to be tricky. If you have a huge influx of people at one time, do you remember the Germans at the end of World War II? They were kicked out of Poland completely. They'd lived in Poland for hundreds of years, and they'd lived in the east of Czechoslovakia, the west of Czechoslovakia for hundreds of years. They were all kicked out by the Russians. They all had to go completely. And there was big population movements at the end of World War II. Huge population movements. And at one stage, there were masses of people moving around the whole of Europe. The Jewish population had come out of the camps. Most of them wanted to go to the United States of America. Roosevelt was quite happy for them to go there, but the Zionist lobby in the United States insisted that they had to go to Israel. So they went to Israel. Now, of course, the Aliyah law in Israel means that anybody with Jewish descent can go and live in Israel. Meanwhile, the Palestinians who lived there for thousands of years have got to go because it doesn't belong to them. So this is the kind of world we live in. It's not fair, is it?
No, it certainly isn't. Andy, the effect, though, seems to be that, I mean, certainly the previous lots of generations of migrants were coming to work in various industries because there were labour shortages. Now it seems most of the industry has gone. I mean, most of the way that, that the country, individuals make a living, and the country charges tax on corporation tax and income tax and things like that. Most of these ways of actually making a living have disappeared.
Yeah. Well, that's advanced capitalism in this country. We export the labour where it's cheaper, and we exploit labour in other countries. We want to reindustrialise Britain and get those key industries back in together. Get people with skills again. I mean, for one thing, we've got to get security of our economy. We can't just base it on a service industry, on banking. We've got to spread the kind of risk, if you like. And I think reindustrialising, especially those places that were left behind under Thatcher and the deindustrialisation of those years and Europe, I would argue, we need to reindustrialise those places, rebuild the communities in those places and towns and cities, reskill, re-educate and get a workforce there.
This is a guy called Phil in Hertfordshire. I have no idea who Phil is, but he did phone in and I'll tell you afterwards what channel it was. It might be LBC, something like that, a few weeks ago, to talk about how he sees the country. He sees that this government and previous governments have just been dismantling the entire country.
Phil is in Hertfordshire. Good morning.
Good morning. I was just ringing about our illustrious leader, Mr. Starmer. When he gave one of his speeches on TV, he said, "We are a government of service."
Yes, he did.
Well, he did. My question is, well, when's that going to start?
Or who for?
Because,
who are you serving?
Well, they're serving themselves, aren't they? All we've had up till now is a government of destruction, discontent, and doom and gloom. When is the service going to start? And what exactly did he mean by service? What's he going to improve? What is he going to serve? I think they've forgotten that MPs are elected to represent the people and to, like Mr. Starmer says, serve the people. Well, I want to know when it's going to start.
I don't think they know who the people are. I think that's the problem. They think they are the people.
Oh, I think, Dr. Renee, that the ego has got the better of them. They've developed massive egos and they're very self-indulgent. And they're obviously getting a kick out of it, making these decisions, but they are suppressing the people. And they're also, I feel that there's a lot of depression as well. People are beginning to become depressed when you speak, in general public, you speak to friends and cafes and things like that. No one's happy.
No.
And there's such a doom and gloom feel about it.
And now, do you get any sense of a vision? And I spoke about this the other week. So, okay, we can deal with some bad things if we understand where we're going. Is there vision? Is there drive? Do we have a goal?
Well, no, there's no vision, there's no drive, and all we can see, all I can see, is destruction. All I can see is a dismantling of the fabric of society and dismantling of things that work. There's no reassemble, is there? There's no, right, we're going to get the NHS and we're going to turn it around and we're going to get rid of this thing that doesn't work and we're going to replace it with that. There's nothing. There's actually nothing. So my question is, why? Why are they doing this?
Well, and also priorities, isn't it? It's about giving people, their union paymasters, lots of money and taking away stuff from more vulnerable people. Thanks for your call, Phil.
Yes, your union paymasters. Yes, I don't. Well, do you want to just address that straight away?
Yeah. Well, the trade unions are the only people fighting for workers' wages. So we bring that union dividend, they used to call it, but 20% at least for trade union members to bring that in. But also, I think where trade unions are active in workplaces, actually they're more productive because they don't have to fight, every single employee of a large multinational company. They can talk with the trade unions and actually work and do productive stuff that actually helps everybody.
Yeah, so that's Phil in Hertfordshire speaking. I think that's Talk Radio, Talk TV, one Saturday or Sunday morning. Martin, dismantling, is that really what Starmer is about? I think he's absolutely right there. He was saying that when the first thing the government did when they got in July was to say things are really bad, it's going to get worse before it gets better, which isn't exactly putting a fire in everyone's belly, is it?
No, but I dare say that the people who were having that little conversation there, none of them voted Labour. You can tell by the way they're talking. So, of course, that's
not the point, is it?
No, let me just make the point, Tony. They've just lost an election very, very badly. The Tory party have the worst electoral result since 1834. Now, obviously,
maybe they didn't vote at all. Maybe they didn't vote at all, and it doesn't really matter whether they voted Labour or not.
It does.
Did you vote Labour?
I'm not going to answer that because I'm a member of the party.
So it's irrelevant.
Okay. No, the point I'm making, Tony, is Starmer's only been in power since July.
Yeah.
So they've already decided that he's wrecked the NHS. Rachel Reeves, whatever else she's done, has put in a load more money into there. It's not enough.
So the dismantling by the Tories is now being continued by Labour.
Well, I mean, I think that is the issue. I think if you look at the budget, Rachel Reeves's budget is, like the curate said, good in parts. At least it is an expansionary budget from a macroeconomic point of view. If the Tories had been in, it wouldn't have been an expansionary budget. They'd have cut taxes and slashed public expenditure.
From an economics point of view, does industry and good wages matter?
Yes, it does. But of course, we've had decades of mismanagement. The policies from the 1980s onwards were disastrous. I remember when Thatcher first brought in her policies in the 1980s, she was massively unpopular. They were down to about 27% of the vote. It was quite clear that the policy wasn't working, and eventually she stopped doing it. But of course, it's now in Tory mythology, this era of Thatcherism is regarded as a golden age. It wasn't a golden age. My economics tutors at Oxford University and the 340 economists who wrote to the Times said, do not do this is stupid. They did it. And of course that is fundamental. Once you've got rid of a steel industry, it doesn't magically come back. You can't just reinvent it.
Well, this is a problem, Andy, isn't it? We've got rid of Port Talbot. We've now got some sort of electric arc furnace to make steel there. And also, I mean, your own industry, the railway industry, yes, they're overcrowded. Many trains are overcrowded at peak times, particularly. But the fact of the matter is, the motorways are also jammed. And if you're trying to commute, most people who've got a car or a train will use the car because it's cheaper.
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, takes those industries, steel industry, take them into public ownership, and if they're competing with cheaper, inferior materials abroad, then subsidise it. I mean, I think, anyway, that's something else. But with transport, I mean, look, the Tories cancelled, HS2 and, the history of HS2 and how it got to where it isn't right now is unbelievable. The to-in and fro-in, the consultancies and
the bat shed.
the waste.
Have you heard about this thing this week? The bat shed, £100 million bat shed. This is the cost of the bat shed to protect the colony near the HS2 line has topped £100 million. John Thompson tells the industry conference there was no evidence that bats were even at risk from trains. So something's wrong.
Yeah, instead of the whole thing being publicly owned, it's all put out to private companies, and they're making a killing.
Yeah,
they've got to be making a killing, right? And look, the HS2 was more about capacity than anything else. It wasn't about necessarily getting to Birmingham 10 minutes or 20 minutes earlier. It was about relieving the capacity on our Victorian railway lines. So the failure to kind of carry on that scheme, and I would have thought actually Labour would have been more bold and actually recommitted to building that, because all the land's bought, right? All the kind of infrastructure has kind of been dug out.
Everyone's made their money, they're now off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Amazing. Martin.
Well, I mean, we have debated HS2 before. I mean,
£100 million for
I mean, I suppose. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I would have argued that you could probably have looked at things like, upgrading northern interior railway lines across the Pennines and so on.
That's the sort of thing,
rather than linking
this
to
sounds
London,
to me more
because
like
obviously that just that's actually potentially going to suck the resources out of the north.
Like a kind of contract fraud, basically. I mean, what on earth is this about? Someone has managed to get into the say, oh, you're going to have this batch shed. It's very, very important. And someone has made an absolute fortune making it. And apparently, according to this chap, John Thompson, there's no actual evidence that bats were even... I mean, this is the sort of thing that we've got like Hinckley, like a white elephant. And I'm worried that HS2 was rather like that it was over... I mean, obviously, it's your department, but it's over engineered. The idea is to get the existing track, the existing stock, upgrade as much as you can, rather than build a completely new railway.
Right, yeah, though I think the engineers would have a lot to say about that, because it is, once you start running trains over a certain mile an hour, you can't just do it on ballast. It's got to be more firmer. So it had to go through the whole process. But the point here is when the project was first announced and the cost, if successive governments had just carried that through and been bold enough and just said, right, okay, we're going to borrow to kind of achieve this project, it would have been a whole pile cheaper, and we'd have been in a different place right now. But on the Northern Rail kind of thing, I mean, yeah, it was going to extend all the way up through to Scotland, but they are going to do now, and this is a worrying point. The regional mayors up north are now looking at kind of doing this kind of HS2B or whatever, these kind of mini projects.
HS3.
Whatever it is. Yeah, no, I'm trying to think what they called it, but it's got an acronym. But anyway, but they're on about now, or suggesting that there's going to be public-private partnerships in this. And we all know that PFI, we all know what that's done to the NHS. Yeah. It's probably why the NHS is in the state it is at the moment.
Well, and also, so for example, with all the private money that's come in for Hinckley, it's so expensive, Hinckley C, that it's forcing all the other energy prices up in order to make it viable. So you've got, what they're doing is they're creating these extremely expensive aspects to various industries and whatever, and then the rest of it that's actually cheaper and working is people are forced to pay more for it. It just seemed absolutely crazy. So the other thing I've got to ask you about, I looked up the other day how much an open return ticket is, standard, not first class, to London from Bristol Temple Meads.
Yeah.
£250.
Yeah.
Return. That's if you want to come back on any train the next day. Now, this is starting to take the mickey.
Yeah, I mean, look, the ticketing system in this country, I won't even start to try and fathom out. But there's a lot of things into it. In that what we have in this country, as opposed to most countries in Europe, is that you can turn up whatever day you want, at whatever time you want, buy a ticket and get on a train. Whereas in Europe, pretty much every train you have to book a seat on, especially the high speed stuff, the intercity stuff. So there's differences in that, but yeah, it could be a lot cheaper, and it's.
Why is it £250?
I don't know. They just sell it to see what they can get.
You know what? What makes me think is that perhaps it's just simply that they know most of the people buying those train tickets will be on expenses, so they're not paying for them themselves. They're just getting some sort of company to pay for them.
Yeah. They got a ticketing system that exploits. They put computer algorithms with it, and this is what they get. And so they'll
AI. Don't tell me AI at Network Rail.
But they'll do the cheap tickets when there's trains running around with no people on them. So there's that as well.
Well, that is irritating. Also, there's a few stories this week to do with the railways. Kick in the teeth for London's rail commuters, season tickets to rise by £300 on delayed trains. That's the Evening Standard. But an interesting one, I thought. Anyway, it's a low-cost rail operator announces a 50% growth between the North East and London over the past 2 years. So this is Lumo, which launched its first trains in October 2021. It runs a few services a day between London, King's Cross and Edinburgh, with stops in Newcastle, etc. So this is almost like the free market going on in railways, which was the so-called Major's dream when he privatised it. But actually it's a company that's running just a few trains a day that are cheaper than the other ones.
Well, that was what the privatisation was all about, wasn't it? To reduce the burden on the taxpayer, building competition so that everybody have cheaper fares. But what happened in the end was that, the smaller companies merged with bigger companies and they adopted regional monopolies, which are pretty similar to what was established under British Rail, because actually that worked under British Rail. And yeah, they charge accordingly. Lumo, the open access operator, fair play to them. Well done.
Okay, so can you just give us a resume of what the Workers' Party's up to at the moment? I mean, I don't know. You've licked your wounds from the general election. Yeah. What direction is the party heading in?
Well, we've got a lovely problem. Is that because now we've got a lot of members to look after, and we need to change our rule book for one thing, because we're getting branches setting up across the country. So we need to work out how our democracy is going to work in the future. We're focusing on a couple of by-elections. Well, we're going to focus on by-elections, but a couple of elections that are coming up as well. So that in the short term, we're looking on those type of short-term electioneering. But our real focus is to get the party ready for the next general election. And I know, it's a long way off, but we've got to do the prep. And that means, getting the policies right. So one of the things I've been doing with the Veterans Group, of course, is trying to develop policies with the veterans, and that'll feed into our Congress. So we'll do that. We'll get people elected in the positions. It's all kind of nice problems, but they're good. We're happy to do it.
So is George Galloway the sort of guy that doesn't mind a bit of democracy? So the membership voting him out, possibly even, or voting for something that he totally disagrees with?
Well, yeah. George is definitely the guiding light, and rightfully so, because a lot of what he says is spot on. We've got 3 deputy leaders. I'm one of them. We feed into the process as well, but we're certainly, from when we were a small party of, a couple of hundred people, we're now touching 3,000. So that then, we have to build in democracy into the process. Whereas before, we done, our last Congress, for example, we done a lot of, communication with the membership, and even people visiting the website about, what our policies should be. And we developed that through a kind of communicative, process through the website and forums. And that got put on the table, as draft reports and essays as to what our policy would be. That's going to have to change soon, because there's a lot more members, there's a lot more input, and we need to put that democracy in place to make sure that happens.
You know what? I bet you're going to be just like the Greens. You get anywhere near power and you'll be nobbled.
Probably. But hey, that's democracy. I don't mind dying on that particular sword.
Okay, well, if you can hang around for a little while, we've got David Miller's joined us now. Hi, David.
Hello.
Just to introduce you a bit, your claim to fame is being sacked by Bristol University.
I've only got one claim to fame.
You've got a few. I think you've got more than just one. All right, fair enough. But certainly, as far as we're concerned, can you just tell us how that's all gone? Because I noticed from time to time we hear a little bit more about. Because you're a writer, a lecturer, professor, and suddenly the Israel lobby turns on you, and Bristol University seems to cooperate with them. So how did it all turn out?
Well, how it turned out was that I took them to court and we won. The court decided I'd been wrongfully dismissed, and the court decided that the reason I'd been wrongfully dismissed was because I had anti-Zionist views, which was not what the university had said. The university said it's because I'd upset students. And therefore the court decided that not only was I dismissed because of my anti-Zionist views, but that anti-Zionist views were worthy of protection in a democratic society, which is the terminology from the Equality Act, which means that henceforth anti-Zionist views are protected under law, and are nothing like being the opposite of worthy of respect, which is akin to fascism. So
it's interesting, isn't it? We had quite a lot of journalists who have been arrested. Craig Murray, We've had Richard Medhurst, Sarah Wilkinson, for anti-Zionist views. Actually, I don't think all of them have been arrested, but the thing that bothers me is the way that the police collect these journalists' contact books and their information, which could then find its way into the hands that those individuals could be then targeted over in Israel, if that's where they are. So how does that translate into the police arresting people supposedly for their anti-Zionist views? That what the police say is that it's terrorism.
Well, I mean, there's two things, isn't there? I mean, the police have got two cudgels to use against us, one of which is the Terrorism Act, which they're increasingly using against journalists, including, of course, most famously recently, Asa Winstanley, the only journalist so far to have been, full-time journalist to have been raided at his home address as opposed to when he's coming in or out of the country. And the second cudgel they've got is anti-Semitism. Now, of course, what they define as anti-Semitism is what the court, in my case, decided was anti-Zionism. So there's a contradiction there, isn't there? The police in 2016, along with every government department, adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism, which is the Israeli government's...
So did that put the police at odds with the Home Office, for example, and the rest of the government, or what?
No, the Home Office adopted it as well. Every single government department.
God, really?
And not only that, before the new government was elected, I think Gove and also Cruella was saying that not only should we have the IHRA, but we should have a charter which every public body should sign up to, saying that, you know, if you said something bad about Israel, you should be killed or something. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but that's the kind of tendency which we're facing. So the other cudgel is of course anti-Semitism, and so that's why we've got a 4,000% increase in anti-Semitism in the last year, because people are being arrested for saying "Free Palestine" and "From the river to the sea." And the best one is the two women in October last year who had effigies of bloodied babies who were arrested for a hate crime against the Jews. Somehow this was a trope. And of course it's because the definition they're using is a definition which mainly mentions Israel. So these are anti-Zionist crimes which people are being counted as anti-Semitic crimes. And that is the difficulty.
So is there any solution in any sort of electoral politics? So, for example, with the general election, with a new government coming in, with Starmer, within the Conservative Party, an election of a new leader?
Well, obviously, you're having a laugh with that question, but I mean, no. Of course, there's no alternative. There is no alternative in party politics in this country, in the US, in Germany, but because the main parties are all Zionist.
So, the parties are deciding these things? It's just that they happen to be pro-Zionist.
They're all Zionist. I mean, in this country, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Lib Dems, and the Greens are all Zionist parties. The Workers' Party is not a Zionist party. I'm glad to say.
Oh my goodness! What a coincidence! We have someone.
It's one of the only, one of the very few that there are. And as a result, in this country, and in America and in Germany, if anyone wants to do anything in solidarity with the Palestinians, we have to destroy the current political system and have new parties, because the old parties are not repairable.
Andy, do you just want to say something about why it is that you think that your party's in such a tiny minority here amongst British political system?
Yeah, well, I think Labour has forgotten socialism, and I was scribbling notes, and I'm glad I've read them again, because I attended this year the TUC. So we're talking Labour movement now. Have a guess. How many times was socialism or socialist mentioned in the whole? So we're talking TUC now. So the General Council report, every single motion from all the affiliated trade unions in the TUC. How many times was socialism mentioned?
5.
0. And whilst I am a gambling man, and I'll probably gamble that same result is the same with the Labour Party conference as well, and all the reports from there. So my point being is that no one talks about socialism anymore, and that's gone. It's neoliberalism. It's capitalism, red tooth and claw. So I think what we've got to do, if you're of the left, and I mean the socialist left, not the liberal left, not the woke left, but if you're a socialist, then we got to start building a socialist party as an alternative to the Labour Party.
Is that Corbynista? Is he socialist?
I'm afraid not. No.
No?
Well, there will be socialists there, but I think they're wasting their time right now. Jeremy Corbyn had the opportunity, I think, several years ago to turn all of those hundreds of thousands of people that were singing his name in Glastonbury for the love of God. He could have turned that popular support into a real, a socialist alternative to Labour, and he didn't.
Why not? Why not?
Oh, you'll need to ask him. I don't know.
Well, we'd ask David. What do you think? We should be mourning the death of socialism, David? Something has happened, hasn't it, to the Labour Party particularly?
Look, I mean, the mainstream parties have been dead for a long time. There was a brief moment after 2015 when Jeremy comes in, and we all think, is there a chance? And of course, there wasn't. And Jeremy has betrayed his own legacy. And part of the reason for that, I think, is that he listened to his advisors. I mean, he had advisors around him, people who had given very, very bad advice and resulted in him losing the leadership of the party. And what did he do with them? Did he sack them? No, he still got them advising him, and they're giving him the same advice. And that's why he's not going to play a meaningful role in a new left, which the Workers' Party, I think, is going to be at the head of.
Well, the fact of the matter is, though, Britain is just the unsinkable aircraft carrier. We are little minnows that get ordered around by the Empire, and the Empire has just got a new boss this week. Well, it's not really a new boss, it's a recycled old boss. There was a similar problem that we've had with the British Labour Party with the Democrats, David. I think most of us can look at Kamala Harris and think, well, that wasn't actually your best player. But why do you think Kamala Harris was up against Trump rather than somebody else?
Well, because it was too late for them to change it. I mean, people said if she'd gone in sooner that she could have persuaded people she was a nicer person and got more votes.
Well, someone must have said within the party. Hang on, someone within the Democratic Party must have said, "Look, there's no way that Biden can run. The guy's off his head." And why was there no serious attempt to get a Democrat? Like somebody like Bernie Sanders, who whatever failings, at least he's got a lot of popular support in the States still, in the Democratic Party. You even had people heckling Kamala Harris over Gaza, for example, from her own party. Now, this isn't Trumpites infiltrating a Democrat rally. This is her own people heckling her. She obviously wasn't the best one.
Well, but the Democrats, the people in charge of the Democrats, are deranged. I mean, they're just deranged, and they wouldn't backtrack on the genocide, and they also have this view, don't they? They have this mad view. They're all liberals. They have this mad view that the Russians are trying to intervene in the election, and the Russians are working with Trump, and all this kind of utter nonsense, some of it sourced from British intelligence actually back in the day, and so they've got no way of actually dealing with the actual politics of the situation, and so that's a problem for them. But look, the Democrats are never going to be anything which is going to move towards a progressive politics, and really the function of the Democrats in this period has been not to take on Trump and to try and win against Trump. The function of the Democrats has been to expunge and expel the possibility of people supporting the Palestinians, and that means, of course, expunging and expelling Muslims, Palestinian Americans, and Arab Americans, because that's the agenda, right? Both in this country and in America, is to remove those people altogether from parliamentary politics. And that's what the strategy was of the Blairites who went over there to help Kamala to get rid of the Muslims.
I say, my God, because this is horrific. If you've got a powerful movement in the United States which is supporting Israel, to make sure that any support that there is, which there is a fantastic amount in the United States for the Palestinians and for peace and for humanity, is cancelled out.
That's right, and that's why, of course, the movement has to say, look, that game's finished. The game is over. We have to have new parties. And, in the UK, we've got the Workers' Party. In the US, it's not really, it's the American Communist Party. I saw won the odd seat in some of the local elections. But the movement needs to understand that there will be no end to the genocide while we engage with the mainstream parties. We have to take matters into our own hands. And that's, of course, what people did in the streets of Amsterdam last night. And that's going to happen more and more.
Well, hang on, because in Amsterdam, there was an attack apparently on Israeli football supporters, an anti-Semitic attack it was called.
A pogrom, they've called it. No,
what happened?
Well, there was an attack on the people of Amsterdam, on Muslims in Amsterdam, Moroccan people. The Palestinian flags were removed from buildings, and it was a very calm and measured response to that from some very brave Dutch Muslims who chucked some of the Zionists in the drink. made them say free Palestine before they let them go. I mean, they were actually very gentle with them. So this was not an attack by Dutch Muslims or by people in Amsterdam. It was an attack by the fascist. And in fact, we now know that. I was going to say the fascist football fans from Israel, but now we now know that the Mossad was involved. The Mossad's goal was, of course, to stir up trouble.
What is Israel doing in a European football competition?
Well, they shouldn't be in a football competition. I mean, my question is much more than that. It's not just a question of what's Israel doing in the football competition. What is Israel doing in the domestic politics of the UK, of Holland, of the US, of Germany, of France, of Spain? Why are they there? Why are they involved in pushing Islamophobia, trying to get Muslims out of public life, trying to cause trouble so that the Palestinians or the Muslims are blamed and can be pushed out of public life? It's the same strategy they're using in the US as they've been using overnight in Amsterdam.
Well, in a way, a bigger question is why has the mass media coverage of that today been all about the Israelis having to send aircraft over to rescue these Israeli citizens who've been attacked by anti-Semites?
Poor genocide heirs who've been attacked for being genocide heirs. Yeah, it's ridiculous, of course. I mean, if that's the definition of a pogrom, well, we might need to have a little think about what pogroms were.
Well, we've got 5 or 6
past.
different channels over here. They're all saying the same thing. How come? How do they manage that?
Well, their propaganda is, first of all, I mean, you're asking me too many questions with too many ramifications. Look,
that's my job.
So the mass media is, when it comes to the question of Zionism versus the Palestinians, it's on the side of the Zionists, and part of the reason for that is that the counter-terrorism apparatus, which dominates most news about these things in this country, is signed up to Zionism. But part of it also is, of course, the effectiveness of Zionist propaganda, and part of it also is the fact that the Zionists have penetrated much of the mass media.
Right.
It's 3 things.
Okay, Andy, what do you make of the? Is there some sort of, so before we say goodbye, some sort of solution to this over in? Particularly the massacre in Gaza, although of course this is spreading to many other fronts. I mean, one thing I would agree with Donald Trump in is he seems to be absolutely aware that this could turn into a third world war. It could bring in, there's already the fighting going on directly into Lebanon. And the threatened exchange of ballistic missiles with Iran. Is there any way to stop this kind of thing?
That's a huge question for little old me. Hundreds of politicians over the years have tried to answer that, but for me, I think United States are using Israel for their geopolitical influence in the region, right? For whatever reason, there's hundreds, but whatever reason you want to pick, let's say that. So I think, Israel can't fight a war without any weapons, so stop giving them weapons. And that includes the UK as well. Stop giving licenses out. Not just stop the what was it, 8 we stopped. Stop the whole 30 that's going, anyway, 8%. Anyway, they can't fight a war. And get to the end bit. The negotiation always brings about peace, and let's count the middleman. The slaughter that's going on there. Everybody in the world, I think, apart from the leaders of certain countries, understand that this is a really bad thing. They also understand that what happened on October the 7th was a really bad thing. You don't solve that bad thing by killing more people, because what you're doing is creating more, depending on which side you're on, freedom fighters, terrorists, you're going to create more of those people, unless you get rid of every single Palestinian, which is probably what they're trying to do in my mind. But the fighting's got to stop, and then, well, 2-state, 1-state solution,
Well, they seem to like to get people fighting over whether it's a 1-state or a 2-state. It seems to me that it doesn't really matter that if you're going to have Zionists in charge, 1 state is never going to work. It's going to have to be 2 states, 2 separate regions, unless the Zionists are crushed, politically crushed. But anyway, thanks ever so much for coming in. The Workers' Party is your party. Any bits of news, anything coming up in the next few weeks, or?
No, just come and join us. You know what we got to do. We've got to be the socialist alternative, so come and join us.
Okay. Andy Hudd, thanks very much for joining us. What about, do you see any solution? I remember asking the same question to a BBC journalist who knew Golda Meir and people like this for years on the Middle East problem, and he said, no, there is no solution. Do you see any solutions to the question I just asked Andy?
It's quite straightforward. We all know what the solution is. Don't we? I mean, the solution is the end of Israel. You remove Israel, then you've removed all the need for there to be conflict.
They've got nukes, haven't they? They're not so easy to winkle out necessarily, are they?
They stole the nukes from America, of course. Americans did nothing about it, but yes, they will be collapsed. They can be collapsed, and we're at a point where decisions can be taken in the Islamic Republic of Iran which can lead to them in short order collapsing, and that's what has to happen in order for there to be peace in the Middle East. There's no other way.
So this is a military solution?
That's right, yeah.
What about financial? What about just stopping the cash? What about stopping the weapons, as Andy said?
Well, I mean, the problem is that...
Isn't that going to force a political reality on the ground over there?
Well, it would, but the Americans aren't going to do that, and they're supplying 69% of the weapons. And the Germans aren't going to do that. They're supplying 30% of the weapons. We're supplying the intelligence and various bits of training and other things, offering the Cyprus bases to them. But those three countries who are, the top of the evil of the world are not going to change their minds. So they have to be forced. And the only way that they're going to be forced is by a military defeat. And of course, we're seeing in the north, Hezbollah are routing the IDF. We're seeing continued attacks from Gaza, and indeed in the West Bank, and we're sitting waiting for what is going to be the response of the Islamic Republic of Iran. They've said that they will respond. They've said that they will respond much more than they did previously, which was 200 missiles, almost all of which precisely hit their targets. Although no one was killed, I think one Palestinian was accidentally killed. And so we're sitting waiting for that. And of course, we just had Trump elected, and the question is, what will the calculation be of the Islamic Republic of Iran in the weeks ahead?
Yeah, well, they must have probably known that Trump was likely to win.
Of course.
Martin, you also think similar thoughts about the only way to defeat Israel is militarily, or not?
I think so. We've reached the point now where you can't talk with people who are not willing to talk. I mean, there's been the Islamic Republic have tried to negotiate, as has Hamas and Hezbollah. As Nasrallah, according to the Lebanese foreign minister, had agreed to a 21-day ceasefire, so that's where they knew where he was going to be when they dropped the bomb on him and killed all these hundreds of people, and they killed him at the same time. Now, ultimately, war is horrible, but it's the way the world works. And the Israelis, as we had the chap on last week, the Christian Zionist from Colorado, and I was saying to him, well, you haven't got any hypersonic missiles. The West
they just tested their first
one. Well, yes, I know, but it's too late, because the thing is, we're actually in the war right now this minute, and it'll take at least 10 years to develop those hypersonic missiles. I'm afraid that because of the procurement process of the military-industrial complex in the West puts money in the pockets of the shareholders of the companies, but it's a rubbish way to organise things.
So you also agreed that Britain, Germany, the United States are not going to turn the screws on Israel to stop killing civilians?
They're not. Clearly not. And if obviously the other side, of the axis of resistance have been trying to find a way to negotiate with them. And of course they have to do that, even if they don't believe the other side is going to negotiate. You've got to go through the process if you're going to carry people. The same as the way the Russians have bent over backwards to negotiate with the West. People don't realise that Putin, in fact, in Russian terms, is a moderate. The pressure he's coming under in Russia is to take a harder line. But of course, if you do that, you then box yourself into a corner with the uncommitted in the developing world. They've got to see that there isn't really any other option. And I think the South Africans would, they ultimately, they led the charge in terms of accusing Israel of genocide. Ultimately, you don't stop these things by talk. I mean, we've got war memorials all over this country. We didn't talk Hitler out of power, did we?
No. Okay, so talking is what Donald Trump did at his victory speech, and he did mention some of the various wars, and he said he's going to do what he can to stop. His phrase is "stop the chaos in the Middle East." I'm not sure if that means obliterating Iran, that would stop the chaos. That's what he seems to be implying. Let's have a listen to Donald Trump's victory speech the other night now.
This will forever be remembered as the day the American people regained control of their country. So I just want to say that on behalf of this great group of people, these are hard-working people, these are fantastic people, and we can add a few names like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He came in. And he's going to help make America healthy again. And now he's a great guy, and he really means it. He wants to do some things, and we're going to let him go to it. I just said, but, Bobby, leave the oil to me. We have more liquid gold, oil and gas. We have more liquid gold than any country in the world, more than Saudi Arabia. We have more than Russia. Bobby, stay away from the liquid gold. Other than that, go have a good time, Bobby. We're going to be paying down debt. We're going to be reducing taxes. We can do things that nobody else can do. Nobody else is going to be able to do it. China doesn't have what we have. Nobody has what we have. But we have the greatest people also. Maybe that's the most important thing. This campaign has been so historic in so many ways. We've built the biggest, the broadest, the most unified coalition. They've never seen anything like it in all of American history. They've never seen it. Young and old, men and women, rural and urban. And we had them all helping us tonight, when you think. I mean, I was looking at it. I was watching it. They had some great analysis of the people that voted for us. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. They came from all quarters, union, non-union, African American, Hispanic American, Asian American, Arab American, Muslim American. We had everybody, and it was beautiful. It was a historic realignment, uniting citizens of all backgrounds around a common core of common sense. You know, we're the party of common sense. We want to have borders. We want to have security. We want to have things be good, safe. We want great education. We want a strong and powerful military, and ideally we don't have to use it. You know, we had no wars. 4 years we had no wars, except we defeated ISIS. We defeated ISIS in record time. But we had no wars. They said, he will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars. But this is also a massive victory for democracy and for freedom. Together we're going to unlock America's glorious destiny. We're going to achieve the most incredible future for our people. Yesterday, as I stood at my last stop on the campaign trail, I'll never be doing a rally again. Can you believe it? I think we've done 900 rallies approximately from them. Can you imagine? 901 something, a lot of rallies. And it was sad. Everybody was sad. Many people, I said, this is our last rally. But now we're going on to something that's far more important, because the rallies were used for us to be put in this position where we can really help our country. That's what we're going to do. We're going to make our country better than it ever has been. And I said that many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness. And now we are going to fulfill that mission together. We're going to fulfill that mission. The task before us will not be easy, but I will bring every ounce of energy, spirit, and fight that I have in my soul to the job that you've entrusted to me. This is a great job. There's no job like this. This is the most important job in the world. Just as I did in my first term, we had a great first term, a great first term. I will govern by a simple motto: promises made, promises kept. We're going to keep our promises. Nothing will stop me from keeping my word to you, the people. We will make America safe, strong, prosperous, powerful, and free again. And I'm asking every citizen all across our land to join me in this noble and righteous endeavor. That's what it is. It's time to put the divisions of the past 4 years behind us. It's time to unite. And we're going to try. We have to try. And it's going to happen. Success will bring us together. I've seen that. I saw that in the first term when we became more and more successful. People started coming together. Success is going to bring us together, and we are going to start by all putting America first. We have to put our country first for at least a period of time. We have to fix it. Because together we can truly make America great again for all Americans. So I want to just tell you what a great honor this is. I want to thank you. I will not let you down. America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, richer, safer, and stronger than it has ever been before. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So that's Donald Trump's victory speech this week. David, thank you for not giving up and walking out as you're listening to that. It is tempting. It's quite long. It's about 6 minutes or so. But he's touching on all sorts of interesting points there. He must have been pretty tired, 4 o'clock in the morning or so. But he's on a mission from God. God has spared his life to let him do this.
Yeah, I mean, people believe, don't they? Some people believe who voted for him that he is against war. He will stop wars. And he put out this prospectus, didn't he? Something like a 12-point prospectus about how he's going to eliminate corruption, and they're going to stop corporate power influencing government incorrectly. They're going to stop the pharma industry, etc. I mean, some of the things he was saying sounds moderately like a kind of left-wing social democrat. But of course, what he's actually talking about is that he's going to do the bidding of the Zionists in Gaza. And when he talks about stopping the war, he's talking about killing every last Palestinian. That's what the idea is. No, he wants Bibi to sort it out by January. And
is he going to kill all of the Iranians too? Is that
that's what he'll want to do? Yes, I mean that is we're standing on the edge of World War III. I mean, people already say when they look back in history, they'll say that we've already started World War III.
See, there was a sort of sensible era when there was a thing called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, where deals had been done by the Obama government to say, well, look, you don't build any nuclear bombs and we'll relax the sanctions and let's all live together.
Sure.
Trump tore that up, and people sort of forget that, don't they? I mean, it seems to me that he's what he hasn't really said during the election campaign is how much he hates the Iranians, and this, of course, many people seem to have missed this.
Well, I mean, that's the agenda, isn't it? I mean, that was the agenda for Biden as well. But they have to take on Iran, and the question is only how and when they're going to do it. And that's why, of course, we have to recognise that it's not just that the Zionist entity has to be collapsed. It's not just that we have to remove the Jewish state from the face of the earth and to have a one-state Palestine. It's that we actually have to recognise that there will be no peace or of any significant nature in the world while we have the American empire in charge. Now, of course, we're moving economically and financially to a multipolar world, and US power is declining at a rate of knots, not as fast as we would like, of course, but really in the end, what's going to have to happen is that America is going to have to be defeated in conflict.
What about what he's saying about God there? Because this is obviously a very powerful pull on people's heartstrings. A lot of people do believe in God, particularly in that part of the world, which is known as the Holy Land. There are scriptures that they quote. They will say things like in Ezekiel, the Lord says, with a pleasing savour I shall accept you when I take you out of the nations, and I shall gather you from the lands in which you were scattered. So is that a dangerous thing to read and believe?
When you say the Holy Land, are you referring to America?
No, I'm referring to Palestine.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course,
that's Zionism, though, isn't it? Just following that verse there from Ezekiel.
Well, I mean, yes, of course, Zionism originates in part from Christian Zionism, and they took on the ideas there, and of course, but then, of course, there was, the idea of Israel in the first place was something which the Americans, the British and then the Americans decided they would set up, but the problem is that the Zionists have slipped their leash, and they can't be stopped, and they won't be stopped, and so they have to be stopped. But actually, as was just being said a minute ago, if it comes to the kind of conflict which it looks like we're standing on the edge of with Iran, then America hasn't got hypersonic missiles, and neither has Israel. Neither has any Western power got hypersonic missiles, and because of what's happened here, right? In world historic terms, what's happened is that neoliberalism has undermined the power of imperialism, because Putin was faced when he came into power with a kind of mad ultra neoliberalism, and he reversed it all and brought back in planning. It used to be called socialist planning. The Chinese continue to do planning, and they continue to control the economy, and therefore they have a weapons industry which is capable of producing enough weapons of a much higher quality than the ones which are held in the West to order. The Americans and the British haven't got the weapons. They can't develop the weapons in time because they haven't got a system of command and control, because they've got a neoliberal system. And so that what we're facing is that, because of that is the decline of the US empire, and the fact that the Americans can't even take on and defeat plucky Yemen in the Gulf, because Ansarallah in Yemen have weapons which can sink US aircraft carriers. Right? So that there's a real vulnerability of US empire now.
Isn't that a difficult thing to do, sink an aircraft carrier? They're quite big, aren't they?
They are quite big, but let's remember, they sent one out there, didn't they, a few months ago? And then they said, oh yes, it's come to the end of its rotation, it's going to head back.
Oh, yes.
But the reason it was heading back was because it was so badly damaged that it couldn't function anymore. But they didn't want any footage of that, and it was so badly damaged by Ansarallah. We know that the Americans already knew this was going to happen, because when they threatened Yemen in the first place, they put together this coalition, and the Spanish, the French, and the Challenge left it, and then they let it be known through the pages of the New York Times that actually they thought perhaps it wasn't a very good idea to destroy Yemen, because they had some missiles which might be able to hit American boats. They said it publicly that they were scared.
Well, let's stick with Donald Trump's anti-war claims for a bit. What about this claim that in his 4 years he defeated ISIS?
Well, it was Iran which defeated ISIS, and of course Trump then killed the architect of the defeat of ISIS, Haj Qasem Soleimani, when he was on a peace mission, as everybody knew, and of course let's remember that ISIS was effectively the creation of the US and the UK, with some help from the Zionists.
Have you got any evidence for that? I mean,
well, it's been admitted by the Israelis that they were funding them, they were arming them, and effectively
the British created ISIS.
British and Americans were involved in the creation of ISIS, in Iraq. Yeah, that's right. And then, of course, the whole the operation in Syria was not intended to defeat ISIS. It was intended to defeat the government of Assad, and it failed because, of course, the Russians came in and the Iranians came in, and indeed, of course, Hezbollah came in on the side of the government of Assad.
So he wants to take on and possibly obliterate, this is one of his favourite words, the country that actually really defeated ISIS.
That's right, yes.
Okay, so what about Ukraine? This is another one. He says he's going to shut this war down within 24 hours. That's a big claim.
Well, he might do that. I mean, the Zionists want that to happen because they don't see what the point of giving weapons to Ukraine is. Apart from the fact that they've already lost, the weapons could be much better employed, according to the Zionists, in Tel Aviv. On the Palestinians, on Hezbollah, on Iran, than they are with Comrade Zelensky.
Yeah, these are very different wars. Are they? I mean, for example, you've seen massive. They just announced today, I think it was, that something like two-thirds of those killed were women and children in Gaza. Not the same case in Ukraine, where it's almost exclusively been the military that have been being killed there. But are there connections between those two wars?
Well, I mean, these are both wars which are funded by the West. I mean, the Ukraine conflict was created by the West deliberately, first through the Maidan coup, and then everything that happened afterwards. And of course, what's happening in Gaza is being funded by the West. If it wasn't funded by the West, it couldn't continue. The IDF is already being beaten by Hezbollah on the northern border. But if they didn't have American weapons, then they would be beaten sharpish. They would be forced into a situation where they would have to, negotiate and come to some kind of agreement. So they're similar in that sense. But I think that the difference is that the Zionists have their own imperial agenda. Ukraine doesn't have its own imperial agenda. It doesn't have the capability or the ideology to do that. And the Zionists always have had that imperial agenda. They want a greater Israel. They want to take all of Lebanon, most of Syria, most of Jordan, part of Egypt, most of Iraq.
So Ukraine is a bit of a sideshow.
Well, it is, and it's been a method to try and discipline Putin, and it's.
Because of course he's down in the Middle East too, isn't he? He
is. That's right. I mean, the Russians of course, are in Syria, and in fact, the Russians have lookout posts, manned by Russian soldiers on the border of the Golan Heights, which is, of course, illegally occupied by Israel, and so
where Rupert Murdoch's got his little shareholdings.
That's right, and the Russians fly missions up and down the Syrian coast as a way of trying to dissuade the Israelis from doing bombings in Damascus, and they're in there, but they're not directly involved. Now, just the other week, there was a first time that the Israelis had attacked a Russian base in Syria. Now that if I was Putin, I would be cross about that. I wouldn't,
So Martin, do you agree with David there that actually this is a stoppable one potentially?
Yes,
so he might actually do this for 24 hours.
I think the problem is that the Russians have got a bit of a dilemma now, because Trump is going to make some kind of an offer to resolve it, but it won't be anything like what the Russians are prepared to accept. They were prepared to negotiate at the beginning. I mean, as they've said all along, if you don't negotiate with us now, we're going to drive a harder bargain the longer you carry on fighting. Because don't forget, their young people are dying. They're not dying in the same numbers as the Ukrainians, but they've got to justify to the mums what they died for. And they can't justify it if they settle for anything less than what they went to war for. So they're going to, I suspect that what will happen is the Russians are preparing for some kind of offer from Trump. I mean, Putin yesterday said he was prepared to talk to Trump. You can imagine all the Keir Starmer and all the sort of liberal left in the West going absolutely bonkers, because when Putin's evil and we just can't talk to him and all the rest of it. Trump will talk to him, but the problem from the Russian point of view is he's not going to make an offer that makes sense from their point of view, because they're going to want, they're going to want more than he's going to offer. And of course, at that point, Trump will say, "Well, I tried to talk to him, he didn't listen." And then the hardliners on his own side will say, "Right, well, we've got to fight this to the finish."
Well, look, someone who's well worth following, I think, on much to do with Ukraine, Russia, and generally the Russian military is a chap called Mark Sloboda. He used to work as a officer in the US military as part of their ballistic missile strategy. I'm not sure exactly what he did. I did ask him once and he smiled. But anyway, he had this to say about what he thinks is going to happen in Ukraine and whether Trump can really stop this within 24 hours.
That's not going to happen. First of all, neither the leadership of the West-backed Kiev regime in Ukraine want a deal, want an end to the conflict on terms as they exist right now, and neither does Russia. And it is extremely unlikely that any deal, Trump loves his deals that he presents, will be acceptable to either Kiev or Moscow. Moscow understands, and the West is finally coming to understand, or no longer being able to deny, that Russia is winning on the battlefield. So we've heard some of these plans of Trump surrogates of present and past, like Mike Pompeo. They're completely unacceptable to the Russian government, calling for a ceasefire, an effective freeze of the conflict with the possibility that Kiev can rearm and then take that ground back in a few years. That's completely unacceptable to Russia. I mean, it's just an absolute no-go from the start. And Trump will once again find himself constrained, just like he did in his first administration, by the limits of his office. The U.S. president actually has very little control over foreign and military policy, right? Whether you want to call it, Ben Rhodes called it the blob, the foreign policy elite, the deep state, the permanent bureaucracy, they will present him with a very limited range of options. To me, the most important thing is going to be when he presents his deal. Let's forget what Zelensky and the Kiev regime says at the time, but what happens when Putin says no? How is Trump going to take that? Because then the obvious, he has already threatened to flood Ukraine with so many weapons, you know, his usual exaggeration, to force Russia to accept his deal. Except that the U.S., as he's later admitted, doesn't have those weapons, right? They don't have the munitions required to sustain this regime in this conflict. The military-industrial complex isn't geared up to produce artillery shells and air defense interceptor missiles. And the Pentagon stocks are completely empty at this point.
So that's Mark Sloboda. He's now teaching at Moscow State University International Relations, former quite a senior chap with the US. I'm not sure if it was Strategic Air Command. I think it was after the days of that. But anyway, what do you make of that analysis? That basically Putin... Yeah, this question is, what happens to Trump when Putin says no?
Well, I mean, obviously, the Russians would want at least 5 or 6 of the oblasts of Ukraine. They've currently got almost 4, including almost all of Luhansk and Donetsk, but not quite. And we'd want to get to Odessa. And that, I would imagine that would be the kind of settlement that they would go for. I mean, personally, I think that's crazy, but they should be asking for way more. But that probably is what they would go for. But Trump's never going to offer them that. I mean, that's never going to be offered. So, and then of course there is no possibility of escalating. They've already tried to escalate as far as they can. The Zionists are not going to be pleased with the proper weapons being sent to Ukraine instead of being sent to them, because there's not enough to go around. There's not enough even to defend the Zionists. I mean, this famous THAAD air defense system, which has just been sent into Israel after the last Iranian missiles were sent over. I understand that they take 8 missiles in each launcher, that there are 1,000 of those missiles in the world. They can't produce any more before a year's out. So that's going to last about 5 minutes when the Iranians attack.
Yeah, they're expensive, these things.
Very expensive, yes.
So before we hear from Martin, let's hear a final clip from Mark Sloboda, speaking, by the way, on RT, which is very easy to have a look at on Rumble, folks. You know, that's where I have a look at it, even though it's been banned here on Wednesday. Very interesting coverage on RT of the US elections. In fact, probably more sensible, and it's funny, isn't it, that they blocked it for us. Anyway, he was also asked about Kursk, this incursion that's been going on for several months into Russia itself by the Ukrainians.
The Kiev regime's troops in Kursk have been locked in a fire bag, and they have suffered enormous casualties that the Kiev regime can't afford in both manpower, some of its best remaining units, and in increasingly scarce Western gear, including such systems as HIMARS, as Leopard and Challenger and Abrams tanks and the like. They've been bleeding so much for absolutely zero strategic gain or value from this. This was a short-lived tactical and InfoWar success and a huge strategic catastrophe that has led to the acceleration of the collapse of the Kiev regime forces in South Donbass region and the Pokrovsk area. So I think Zelensky is actually taking advantage of this situation, of Trump's election, to do what he should have done a long time ago and withdraw from a bad situation instead of throwing good after bad. I think this isn't a signal. I don't read it as a signal of him moving towards peace discussions or negotiations. Rather, he's taking advantage of a change in political circumstance to do what militarily should have been done a long time ago.
Well, the intervention in Kursk, as he's saying there, was was a reckless throw of the dice by Zelensky. So they could put in their main reserves were put into that, but of course they're not necessarily.
Hang on, you could also see Kursk as a bit of an exercise, really, for the NATO countries. A lot of their tech was being trialled there. What can we get away with here?
Well, I mean, the Russians believe that it was actually British intelligence who were behind the whole planning of that particular operation, and it was, it was subcontracted to the British to coordinate that. So, I mean, Britain, in fact, is very much in the bad books in Moscow. You saw what happened with Keir Starmer going to the NATO conference in Washington, and he was trying to get the Americans to agree to use British Storm Shadow missiles to fire into Russia. And it was the Pentagon, through Lloyd Austin, who said, we're not doing that. So he had to come back empty-handed. And, of course, it wasn't just Keir Starmer. You had Boris Johnson, the peacemaker of April 2022, and various other great and good in Britain saying, well, even if the Americans aren't going to fire missiles into Russia, maybe Britain should take a stand and go out in front and fire missiles at the Russians. But the Americans weren't having that either. The Pentagon wasn't having that either, because obviously, if Britain did fire its missiles into Russia and the American missiles weren't used, that would still be, because of NATO and all the rest of it, that would still be, as far as they're concerned, that would still be the Americans getting involved. So the Pentagon, fascinatingly enough, are the people blocking this at the moment, because they will know what will happen. The Russians have made it clear, we will fire back at Britain. Yeah? So if you're in the SAS base in Credon Hill in Herefordshire, when you're having your dinner,
put your tin hats on.
Get your tin hats on, because if you're going to kill our people, and presumably they'll go for military targets inside Russia, so they'll kill a few Russian boys. Well, we're going to kill some British boys inside your territory.
David, do you think that's feasible?
It's perfectly feasible. I mean, the fascination is that in terms of the West Asia and the Axis of Resistance, that the costs haven't moved outside the theatre. I mean, Nasrallah said before he died that if there was any evidence that the Cypriots were involved in helping the Zionists, that Hezbollah would directly target Cyprus. Now, of course, it's not the Cypriot government that was involved. Of course, it's totally against their will. It's the British government who have those two bases, which they should be ejected from forthwith, in my view, in Cyprus. And what could happen, it's easily within the range of Hezbollah weapons, never mind the weapons of the Islamic Republic, to take out those bases altogether. That could be done at the flick of a switch. And the question is only, why on earth have the Axis of Resistance not gone there yet? And they can go there, and the Russians could go there too. The Russians could be taking out Hereford, and indeed Menwith Hill, and GCHQ, and MI6 and MI5 with precision strikes. Could be done at the flick of a switch.
The Russian missiles are really, really powerful. They can fire them from Siberia, and they can hit central United States within half an hour. Yeah. And the West hasn't got anything like that. And of course, the real danger here is any of these missiles could be nuclear armed. And therefore, if that missile is coming towards you, whether you're Russian or on the Western side, you've got to presume that it might have a nuclear warhead.
Okay, hang on, ladies and gentlemen, because we're coming up to Remembrance Sunday this weekend, where we are supposed to, I slightly flippantly in the introduction said it's Forgetfulness Sunday, because all of these great and good, led by the King, will be stood next to the cenotaph in Whitehall, so-called remembering those dead of 2 world wars and other conflicts, because all these people from Afghanistan now queue up there, but a whole load of veterans from the Royal British Legion. Do you think it is a forgetfulness or remembrance, David?
Remembrance Sunday? Well, it's a remembrance of those conflicts which we want to remember. It's not just people complain on the left. They say, "Oh, it's only the conflicts the British were involved in. We don't remember the victims in Kenya or Malaysia or in fact Cyprus or in Dhofar. All the victims of British imperialism or in Ireland."
Because we don't seem to have remembered at all, do we? What we're doing is we're starting another world war. That's right. What we're doing.
So we remember selectively some of those conflicts, but we don't even. It's not even the question of remembering our own casualties, because of course we don't remember. Let's remember. We don't remember the 840 British servicemen killed by the Zionists in the setting up of Israel, right? So there's a selective memory even in the question of our own side. And of course, as you say, there's no remembrance of the horror of the Second World War and what could happen if we tip over the edge into a Third World War, which someone like Keir Starmer appears to be, just wanting to do as a kind of side game. I mean, it's just incredible.
There doesn't seem to also be any remembrance of who won the Second World War.
That's right. Who won the Second World War? It was the Red Army. That's right. The Red Army liberated the whole of Europe, practically.
So Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, was in Sochi this week. He had this to say, amongst lots of other things. I'll put a link up to the full version of these various things, the Trump speeches, etc., and this speech by Putin, which is about an hour or so long from early this week, up on our show page later at thisweek.org.uk.
We see in the Western liberalism that has degenerated into, I believe, in extreme intolerance and aggression towards any alternative, towards any sovereign and independent thought. And today, it justifies neo-Nazism, terrorism, racism, and even mass genocide of civilian population. In the end, that's international conflicts and clashes that might bring about mutual destruction, because the weapons capable of doing that already exists. And it's constantly being improved. It acquires new forms as the technologies develop. And the club of the countries that possess such weapons is becoming wider, and no one can guarantee that in case of avalanche-like increase in threats and final deterioration of legal and moral norms, it would not be used. I have already said that we've come to a dangerous line, and calls of the West to deliver strategic defeat to Russia, a country with the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons, shows extreme adventurism of the Western politicians. At least some of them. Such blind faith in their own impunity and exceptionalism might turn to a global tragedy. At the same time, the previous hegemons used to ruling the world back from colonial times, learn, and more often to their surprise, that no one is listening to them. The attempts to maintain the power slipping away through force only leads to overall instability and great tensions, to casualties and destruction, but the result that they're trying to achieve, to maintain their absolute power, such attempts do not ensure success, because the course of history cannot be stopped. Instead of becoming aware of futility of their strive, the objective nature of changes, some of the Western elites are prepared to do everything not to allow for emergence of new international system in line with the interests of the world majority. The policy of the U.S. and their allies in the past years is more and more prominent through the principle, if I can't have it, no one will. If you're not with us, you're against us. Well, this formula is very dangerous. Because here and in many countries of the world, there is such a saying that you reap what you sow. The chaos and systemic crisis is already in full swing in those countries that are trying to conduct such a policy. The claims to being exceptional, to being liberal and globalist messiahs, to ideological and military and political monopoly, are depleting those countries more and more that are trying to conduct this policy and pushing the world towards deterioration. It comes in direct contradiction with the true interests of the nations of the US and European countries. I'm sure that sooner or later the West will understand that, because the foundation of its former great achievements was always the pragmatic and sober approach, based on very harsh and at times cynical but rational evaluation of what's happening in their own capacities. And here I'd like to highlight once again, unlike our opponents, Russia does not perceive the Western civilization as an enemy. It does not raise the question, us or them. Who's not with us, he's against us. We never say that. We don't want to pontificate to anyone. We don't want to impose our worldview on anyone. Our position is an open one, and it's the following. The West has accumulated indeed tremendous human, intellectual, cultural, and material resources, thanks to which it can successfully develop, remaining one of the crucial elements of the world system. But it is precisely one of, together with other actively developing countries and states and groups of countries, the notion of hegemony in the new international sphere is off the table. And when Washington and other Western capitals become aware of that and recognize this cold hard fact, then the process of building of the global system in line with the challenges of the future will finally enter the phase of true constructive building. I hope to God that it will happen as soon as possible. It is in common interest.
I quite like the way he said, I hope to God. He sounds a little bit like Trump, Martin, but he at least seems to also have a vision of peace. Whether or not it's going to happen or not is another question.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's sober, rational analysis, isn't it? It's not like fantasy land, which we heard from Trump earlier. Ultimately, there's either going to be a nuclear war in which we're all going to die, or the West is going to lose a non-nuclear war. That's all there is to it, Ram. We've reached that point.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite right. I mean, but I think that what we've seen emerging as a result of what's happened in Ukraine and the emergence of multipolarity, and what we've come to learn about the state of military preparedness of the West is that actually it's quite possible for the West to lose. And that if we don't have a nuclear war, where, as you've just said, we all die, then it's very possible that militarily the West will lose, and we will enter a new world where the West is not a dominant element in the world.
So, I mean, aren't our leaders actually dragging us to that defeat? I mean, they've been defeated in almost every war that NATO countries have been involved in since World War II. It's this is just the biggest one so far that they're leading us into now.
I think that's right, but they don't appear ever to be able to understand what the situation is. I mean, the stuff that they come out with about Russia, I mean, I heard the head of, I think it was MI5, it might have been MI6 the other day, talk about the Russian threat and the terrible things that Russians have done, and a child knows that everything he said was wrong. And this is a person who's at the top of the most powerful intelligence agency in this country, and he's unable to actually tell you anything about the world, which is not just ridiculous propaganda. I mean, incredible.
Well, the counter move to the West, which is this sort of rather spectacularly dying empire, being forced to die by its utterly incompetent and maniacal leaders, is this thing called the BRICS, which is up and coming. They had a meeting last week, and one of our favourite economists, Michael Hudson, he did a little podcast earlier this week where he talked about what the BRICS really, how that fits in, this big economic alliance which is growing and growing with a big list all the time, to counter the West.
Well, the question is whether, if they solve these internal problems, whether they're going to still try to have the old predatory economics in the BRICS countries. In the 19th century, Britain had all sorts of ideas about how to have a thriving, popular industrial economy. They were going to tax the landlords. They were going to keep finance and real estate all isolated. But when the British wealthy financiers and investors went to third world countries, to the Ottoman Empire or to Latin America for railroads, utilities, the Panama Canal, and the Suez Canal, they were all of a sudden, that's where they supported the rent-seeking and the grabbing. So this internal contradiction that you rightly point to the United States is going to affect the BRICS as well. And all I can think of is that the BRICS countries will watch this strain within the United States and England. Today's Financial Times had a large, their biggest report was on the commercial real estate crisis, that so many of the biggest buildings in the city, the financial city of London, had debt in excess of the value of the buildings. So here you can, what are you going to do to buy the biggest skyscraper in London if it has $467 million in debt, and they're trying to get $500 million for it, but nobody's going to bid for that. Same thing in America. Commercial real estate is broken. Well, the banks hold the mortgages on these, and if the defaults are soaring for commercial real estate in London, England, and America, just as they are in China. So we're having a worldwide problem, and the question is, are you going to bail out the banks? And if you don't bail out the banks, what's going to happen to their largest depositors, the uninsured depositors, the rich people? Are you going to save them? This is the problem that's going to occur. Already is occurring in China, and it's going to occur in other BRIC countries. So when you look at the BRICS meetings, what you talked about at the beginning quite correctly is we would like to hope that future historians will look back on these meetings in Kazan as the first step to creating an alternative civilization, because we're really talking about a civilization break from the West. And by civilization, I mean the tax system, the debt relations, the monetary relations, the military defense systems, the political systems, all of these in order to avoid the contradictions that you and I have been discussing for decades now. They're going to have to create an alternative. And this is a gigantic job. Obviously, it couldn't be solved at one meeting, or I don't think even by next year meeting they can't. But what is needed is a consciousness that they are trying to create a new basis for a non-Western, non-U.S. dominated, non-unipolar civilization, and the recognition that this cannot be achieved with a friendly relations with the West, that the West will not accept it, and the West will try to have a fifth column of non-government organizations, such as have been recently banned in the state of Georgia, the country of Georgia. They realize that the U.S. has a whole fifth column of a managerial class that would like to take over along the same lines that have enriched it so well as you've described in America and Europe. Well, obviously, the strains of supporting the military budget and the Cold War and the U.S. sanctions against Russia are going to be felt, first of all, in Europe. So I think you're quite right. Already you have the strains pulling the German economy, the French economy, the Austrian economy all apart. And what are the vested interests going to do there? Well, they're going to do what they did in Germany. They will ban these parties, like they're trying to ban the Alternative for Deutschland. They'll ban the left-wing parties. They'll ban the reformist parties, saying these are agents of Putin, agents of China, agents of the BRICS. It's the West that will treat any attempt to be to reform economies as being an attack on the West itself, and by if the West permits the BRICS to create a solution to these tensions, if they permit the BRICS to have a rational tax system, a progressive tax system, as you and I want to see, then America will say, we're not really fighting China or Russia, we're fighting a different economic system. And the geopolitical war we're seeing isn't among countries, it's between one system or another. You can call it one civilization or another, or one kind of economy or another. But this is the civilizational up the ante that there has to be. I didn't see any of that in the BRICS meeting, because that would be that would frighten a lot of countries. And I think that Russia, China, and the other leaders of the BRICS right now are trying to avoid frightening these countries. But implicitly, these economic strains or contradictions that you point out have to be leading in this direction. And these, what you describe as the domestic strains in France, in Europe, in America, as we had under Roosevelt, all of these will be reflected on the geopolitical level. And the vested interests have a twofold fight. Not only fighting against the reformers who don't want to give all the money to the bondholders and the banks, the rentier class, but they're fighting against the ability of BRICS countries to say it doesn't have to be this way. We can do our own way different. And if you want to follow our model and reform your economies and prevent the impoverishment and the economic polarization that your financial class and your bondholding class and banking class and real estate class are causing, then either join the BRICS or emulate us. This is what is the nightmare to the United States. Is not yet a nightmare to the BRICS countries and their vested interests, but you're quite right. It's a nightmare mostly within the West because that is where they're much more aware of the class war here than they seem to be aware of in other countries that don't have a background in studying class war in the way that we have. But everything that they're talking about, restructuring international institutions, is exactly setting the stage for this dual conflict within the West, within the BRICS, and between the West and the BRICS.
So there's Michael Hudson there. I just love the way he takes you through every little bit you need to explain exactly what he's saying. So we can just put the military conflicts aside for 1 minute, David. What you've got here is the West has successfully managed to bring countries like China, South Africa, etc., together in the BRICS. I mean, what Michael's saying is that actually they may be suffering from some of exactly the same problems to do with financial parasitism, rentier classes that the West has. And so that although it looks like it's a unified group, actually there's battles going on within the BRICS too.
Well, there are battles going on within the BRICS, and the whole question of who's allowed to join the BRICS, of course, is part of that battle. I mean, we saw the dispute, didn't we, between Brazil and Venezuela, with Lula suggesting that Venezuela wouldn't be allowed to join the BRICS. But we're also facing a kind of shaking out of the whole of the post-war settlement in Europe. So when he's talking there about the sanctions on Russia, and of course what happened with the sanctions on Russia was that they immediately boomeranged and hurt the West much more than they hurt Russia. And also, of course, they hurt the European countries much more than they hurt America. And that, of course, was also what happened with the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline. And you would think, given this was the guarantor of the future of energy security for Germany, the most powerful nation in Europe, that the German elite would have something to say when the Americans blew up their pipeline. But what did they do? They said nothing at all. Not a thing. Nothing publicly was said. And that really struck me. I didn't, when I saw that happen, I couldn't understand what that was about. And then, of course, one remembers that, the origin of what was called West Germany after the end of the war was that it was created by the Americans, and that the people who they recruited to head the West German intelligence agency was a guy who had been one of Hitler's intelligence officers, and he was also a CIA agent. So all the way through this period, we've had a really strong influence of the US on German politics, which we haven't really, I think, understood. And that of course, is the case in this country too, where you earlier referred to the UK as being the unsinkable aircraft carrier, which is Duncan Campbell's book, wasn't it, back in the day? Yeah, I mean, look, we are systematically in Europe subservient to the US. And we had this period where it looked like globalization was happening and neoliberalization, which was meaning that there would be transnational capital and corporations wouldn't owe a debt of allegiance to a particular state. And all of that has collapsed in the last 5 or 6 years, hasn't it?
But I rather like Michael Hudson's discussion of what he's talking about, the commercial property crisis in the City of London and paralleled in China. I mean, an economic collapse on that sort of scale could lead to as many, if not more, deaths than the sort of war we're talking about in the Middle East, if it's limited to the Middle East. Or, I mean, certainly the effect on the public could be massive if the IMF and the BRICS don't get their act together.
Well, I mean, it's a very serious situation. Yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with particularly with the details of the real estate crisis.
I'd like to. I'll put a link up to that FT article
it's
anyway.
It's a pretty extraordinary account that he gave there.
Martin, do you want to just say what your thoughts are about the BRICS versus the IMF, and what it seems as if both of them are going down the same tubes?
Well, I think there's an overlap between the economic crisis and the geopolitical crisis. In the run-up, when the First World War broke out, the stock markets all collapsed, and then the governments had to step in and organise the economy. And I think, and of course in World War II it was a bit different because the stock market had collapsed in 1929 in the US, and there was in Germany and the US there was an attempt to try and create some kind of economic planning by Haldemar Schlacht, who was the German finance minister, and also by Roosevelt's team in the US. But I think what we're going to see here, so for example, if there is a clash between Iran and Israel, which looks as if it's on the cards before Christmas, that could then lead to the closing of the Strait of Hormuz to oil exports, which will immediately blow up the derivatives time bomb, which has been developing in the financial markets.
These oil tankers are a bit more vulnerable than the aircraft carriers, and they also go up, don't they?
Yeah, but the point is that the traders who trade on a daily basis on what the future is going to be will panic at that point, and that will crash everything. And so the effect of this World War III, if it breaks out in the way I'm suggesting, will be immediate in terms of the effect on the economy because of the futures market.
Fascinating. Anyway, look, we had just last week, David, the admission that this young lad from Southport had been downloading terrorist manuals and things, the guy that went and killed these 3 children, allegedly, because obviously he's not been tried yet. What did you make of that? Everyone was rather surprised. It almost seems to have flipped back one way or another way. First of all, he was being accused of being a Muslim, which he wasn't, and now he's being accused of downloading the Al-Qaeda training manual. Bizarre.
Well, it's not the Al-Qaeda training manual, is it? Let's remember that this was a manual which was translated from the Arabic, found in a flat in Manchester in 1996 or something. It was then taken to the US and bits were added to it. It was published by a US military-funded think tank. It's not the Al-Qaeda training manual. In fact, the original bits of it were written before the creation of Al-Qaeda. So this is a nonsense. It's absolutely nonsense. You can buy this document on Amazon all over the world. So let's knock that off. And the second thing, he was supposed to be, what was it? Ricin. Now, let's remember that the last time we had ricin in the public debate, this guy was trying to create ricin, and there was going to be there was a weapon of mass destruction. Well, ricin isn't a weapon of mass destruction, and he wasn't able to make ricin. He had some beans and he had some shit, and he wasn't able to do anything with it. And because he was mentally ill. There was nothing. It was a non-thing, which the British state covered up for a whole year. They knew that there was no ricin, and they let the whole thing run.
So what do you make of this? Do you believe the police?
No, of course I don't believe the police. I mean, maybe he had the stuff, but it isn't anything. It's not an indication of anything at all.
I mean, it was the ramifications that I think for most people grabbed our attention, which were the riots across the country, fueled by the Tommy Robinson Network. Now, I know you've written something recently, haven't you, about how the Israel... Do you want to just explain a bit, briefly, why you think that this is that he is part of the Israel lobby?
Well, look, what happened, this is a long story. You have to look at the article on
it is, I'll put a link up to it.
Grey Zone, but my argument essentially is that in 2007, 2008, 2009, that some US think tanks funded by the Israel lobby came across to Europe and decided that they didn't want the far right to have a position on Israel which was critical of Israel. And therefore they wanted to co-opt elements of the far right, and they offered them money so long as they abandoned Judeophobia and became fans of Israel and made sure that the only people they said they would hate was Muslims. Now, Nick Griffin of the BNP rejected that. The Front National in France rejected that for a time. But other organisations, which became what was called the counter-jihad movement across the whole of Europe, accepted it, and they became, they focused on Muslims and Islam. And Tommy was one of those set up the English Defence League. The meeting at which the English Defence League was founded at a flat in London by the financier, one of the financiers of the English Defence League, 5 people in the room. 2 of them were from this American organisation funded by the Zionists. So, Tommy Robinson is a Zionist asset. He was then, he is now.
This weekend, you're doing a little event, I believe, in town here, which is called Genocide in Gaza Part 3. Sorry for missing Part 1 and 2. But looking at the education system. Now, I know you, as a university lecturer, have been cancelled by your university, so that's obviously a part of what you're talking about. But what's the rest of this?
It's an online event, actually, so wherever you are in the world, you can join. But this is an event with Leila Atel-Hajj from Prevent Watch, and we're looking at the education system in general. Yes, we'll look at the universities, but in particular, the thing I'm interested in is the way in which there's 135 Jewish schools in this country. Almost all of them are Zionist schools, and I didn't know this until about a year and a half ago. They're actually Zionist schools, and they actually have this. The kids sing the Israeli national anthem, not the British national anthem. They have all sorts of Zionist people coming in to speak. They send their kids to Israel, so that they grow up believing that ordinary British Jewish kids have some kind of birthright to steal Palestinian land, and that's an outrage, and it needs to be stopped. And of course, it's helped to support the genocide.
So the details are email info@bristolpalestinealliance.org, and you can book. It says you can book your place via the link, but that seems to be an email address, David. I don't know if you know any more about this. What I'll do anyway, I'll put a link up to it on
there somewhere.
Yeah, there is. I'm not going to read it out. It's one of these tiny URLs, but I'll put it up on our show page at thisweek.org.uk. Well, David Millo, how do people follow you if they're interested on social media, that sort of thing?
On X/Twitter at tracking_power, or you can look at spinwatch.org, our website.
Thanks very much. And last week we had a piece by a guy called G. Edward Griffin. This week I was reminded by somebody that he also wrote a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island.
Members of the cartel are very wise in this regard. They spend a tremendous amount of their profit money to buy politicians. And they buy the politicians who write laws which sound to the public like they're wonderful because they're protecting the people and assisting the economy and improving a standard of living and all that sort of propaganda. But in reality, it's just to prevent the public from having a choice in these matters. And so cartels always get together and they fix prices and share markets and so forth to the detriment of the consumer. And so the Federal Reserve, in answer to the first question, is what it is. It's a cartel. It's no different than a banana cartel, a drug cartel, an oil cartel. It happens to be a banking cartel. So that's what it is. And if people understood that, and they understood that it is not an agency of the federal government. It is a private organization, which is a stunning reality. It certainly was to me. Most people find that hard to believe. Mm-hmm. But the Federal Reserve is a conglomerate or a cartel of private banks. And these banks the bankers were so wise in their actions that back in 1910, they began the propaganda campaign to draft and create the Federal Reserve. And then in 1913, they actually passed it into law. It meaning the Federal Reserve Cartel Agreement. And there's a little history involved there. It's why I call my book The Creature from Jekyll Island. Is because it's not because Jekyll Island has a creature that comes out of the slimy lagoon or anything like that. It's worse. It's because the Federal Reserve comes out of this private, very secret meeting that took place on Jekyll Island, which is a real island off the coast of Georgia back in 1910, and is made up of representatives of the largest banks in the United States with their connections, their brotherhood, and the big banks in Europe as well. So it was done in secret, private organization of bankers coming together, agreeing not to compete with each other anymore, and to form like a labor union for plumbers or something like that. They're going to regulate their economy, so make it cushy for the plumbers that you've got to pay the same rate to all plumbers, or they have to charge the same rate and so forth. And so you can't have any plumbers coming in and say, well, I can do that cheaper because he gets drummed out of the union if he does that. He's not in the union in the first place. So they formed this banking cartel on Jekyll Island, and that was the beginning of it all. And then they took this cartel agreement that they drafted among themselves to benefit themselves in the economy. They took it to Washington, and they took 3 years to convince the congressmen there and the senators that this would be a great opportunity for them to become statesmen and vote for it and stabilize the economy and all that sort of thing. When in fact it was a private cartel agreement. And I don't think many of those congressmen and senators really understood that at the time. They just thought it was a piece of legislation that they didn't understand, but surely the bankers understood it. And so they just eventually all buckled under, and they voted for it into law in 1913. So coming to the conclusion of this long ladder of information is that they have a cartel agreement to preserve and expand the power of the banks, a private agreement. They take it to Washington. They convince the politicians to pass the private agreement into law called the Federal Reserve Act. Now, a private agreement suddenly becomes law of the land. And so if you and I do not abide by the terms of the private agreement, we can go to prison. But it's not a government creation. It's a private creation. But the government just was stupid enough, these congressmen were idiots enough, to sign it into law to give it the power of the government. So it was a partnership, in another way of looking at it, between the politicians, the political scientists, and the monetary scientists. That's what the Federal Reserve is, a cartel and a partnership between the bankers and the politicians. So that probably tells you enough right there if you understand what's going on in the world. But the details beyond that are extremely fascinating. So the other parts of your question is what can be, jumping to the end, what can be done about it? I use the metaphor of 1,000 spears, or well, what was the word I used? Knives or something to cut it.
A million lances of truth.
Lances of truth, yeah. Well, yeah, but it takes more than truth, Robert. You know, there's an old saying, which I used to use a lot, and then I began to realize that it was a bunch of bunk. The old saying is that truth will ultimately prevail if enough energy is spent to bring it to light. And that's not true, because truth by itself has a great deal of power. But if men are cowardly to stick to the truth, it fails. So it takes courage besides truth. It takes manly action. It takes a strong stance. It takes organization. It takes the acquisition of political power, because you're fighting political power, and truth by itself is not strong enough.
So that's G. Edward Griffin. Thank you very much for whoever it was that reminded me that chap that we had on speaking last week about the inevitability of having no nuclear war, and so the idea of all these countries getting together to have a world government. But there he is talking about this cartel, Martin, that the Americans are now bound by.
Yeah, I mean, it's the people have the idea that the Federal Reserve in the United States of America is actually a government institution, and it isn't. It's actually a private institution that's captured the government. It's what they call regulatory capture in economics textbooks. The Bank of England, on the other hand, was nationalised in 1946, but of course they're still, to some extent, under the thumb of the private sector bankers. You know, they go to the same restaurants and they chat with these people and so on. But it is the case that the Bank of England's economists, for example, will be more critical, because they are basically employed by the government. The Federal Reserve is essentially run completely by the private bankers. But of course, the presentation to the public is that it's somehow a government institution.
I think absolutely fascinating. And of course, if you go back from what Michael Hudson's saying to listening to G. Edward Griffin there, this whole thing is under control. It's a controlled destruction, controlled collapse.
Well, I think you can say that in one way, but in another way, we've just been talking all
This cartel know what they're doing, Martin, don't they? They're basically
yeah, but they know what they're doing in terms of putting money in their own pockets.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah. But ultimately, of course, they don't necessarily win World War III, you know, and they could easily lose. And of course, you know, bankers die like other people die.
The Americans don't care if they lose. They're launching themselves into all sorts of things that they then lose. The idea, surely, as we were hearing, I think from, was it either Putin or Hudson earlier, is that they just want to deny this, whether it's a country or an economy, success, to other people. That's all how they got there.
It's a dog in the manger approach. Yeah. But isn't it interesting that people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are buying land in New Zealand and in Argentina because they think that the thing's going to go down the drain and they think they're going to go and hide out there. Yeah? Because people do move around. People with money can go wherever they want. There's no argument about that.
And we will be talking about land after the break.
I'm willing, oh yes I am. the prophets were written on the studio wall.
So that's Rush, the Spirit of Radio. Before that, we had the Caravans, Willing, and that, well, I think that was around about 1960, 1961. So, welcome back to Not the BCFM Politics Show with Irish Republican Labour activist Martin Summers and me, Tony Gosling. We'll be taking a bit of a, we've done pretty much the US elections. I'm sure it will crop up again, Martin. But last week you talked about land nationalisation, didn't you? Do you want to just do a recap as to what the point of all that is? We've had this discussion at the budget, which is all to do with farmers who are now going to be protesting on the 19th of this month outside Westminster at and over inheritance tax, and the fact that this is seen as basically a direct attack on family farms. But you say that land nationalisation is a good idea.
Well, I see. I think it's an idea that's worth discussing. I don't think necessarily that land nationalisation is what's going to happen, because we discuss it's not. It's not on the agenda.
Yeah, well, we do a lot of things on here that we think might not happen, but we want to talk about them anyway.
Well, I mean, but the thing is, in land nationalisation, the land was nationalised in China. It was nationalised in the Soviet Union. It's been nationalised in Ireland because, ultimately the state owns the land, other than not the Crown in Ireland. You've had land reforms in various developing countries, including Japan, South Korea, where the traditional landlord class was essentially taken. The land was taken off them. And you can only do that if the land is in principle owned by the people in general, rather than the people, the feudal landowners who control it.
The question is, can the people actually get much of an influence on what happens with the land through the government? And is the government actually doing this in the interests of the people or in the interests of corporations?
But I mean, when land was nationalised in the Soviet Union, they gave the land to the peasants after Red Peace and Land was the slogan of the Bolshevik Party. And of course, it wasn't really the Bolsheviks that took the land, the peasants took the land, and the Bolsheviks just said, okay, you can have it. But of course, what Stalin did is he then collectivised the peasantry, forced them into these collective farms, which was a means of coercion.
Well, the kulaks.
The kulaks were eliminated. The kulaks were supposedly the wealthy farmers who were dominating the others, and they were turned into scapegoats so that the government could take over the land and bring in collective farming.
It worked and it didn't work, but it largely didn't work, did it? There was quite a lot of famines and this sort of thing.
That's right, but I mean, the same mistakes were made in China, where they created they gave the land to the peasants, and the peasants were quite happy with that, and then they took it off them again.
It seemed to me the best way to manage it is the way we currently do, which is to have a whole bunch of families growing as much food as they can and passing it on from generation to generation, the land that they know very well. What the government are now doing is they're actually encouraging this land to become a distressed asset, which is built up by corporations. But let's have a listen now to, there's a great little channel called Farming Explained, and when I was scrolling through there the other day, they had a whole thing about nationalisation of land, so it'd be interesting to see what you make of this, Martin.
A sense of stewardship was central to Hall's ideology. He wanted the land to be preserved in a fertile state for future generations, but he felt the existing system was failing to do that. He wants the government as landlord to be an authority that shall be jealous of the land, intolerant of its waste and defilement. All the world over there seems to be little public conscience of the duty that man owes the land, that he shall hand it on, at least unimpaired, to his successors. Everywhere, unthinking deterioration is going on, and though in this country such massive destruction as the Dust Bowl of North America cannot occur, we accept equally flagrant destruction whenever someone thinks that thereby he can make money out of doing what he likes with his own. And that is why you need a knowledgeable, engaged landlord to guide the forces of capitalism towards good farming rather than ecological destruction. Daniel Hall worked as a civil servant in the Agriculture Ministry during the First World War, so he draws all these ideas up in quite a lot of detail in case they be translated into policy, which, spoiler, doesn't happen. Orwin does some maths to work out the value of all British land, £770 million, or over £30 billion in today's money, and that money is to be raised by the government through a new type of stock, which would be given to landowners on a long-term basis and give them a little bit of interest comparable to the rent that they had taken from the land. Then surveys would be undertaken to understand soil types, which had been going on to some extent since Stamp's survey. With this information, large farms can be created by engineers and economists, and the first few will be kept in hand by the government to train not farmers but managers and sub-managers to take on other large farms as they are created. Thus, one of the needs of agriculture would be met, i.e. the recruitment for the management side of the industry of young men of capacity who would otherwise have little or no capital on which to make a start. Like any other industry, Hall wants agriculture to be designed in such a way that you could get a job by being interested in it, getting trained and applying for a position. To achieve this, Hall proposes a new government department which he calls the Agricultural Development Corporation. He thinks this will undertake purely technical work, so it should be insulated from politics and farmers' rights organisations like the NFU. He points to organisations like the Forestry Commission, or I suppose the Bank of England today, which has government endowment and executive powers but is independent. And as such, parliamentary scrutiny of the corporation would be through the Treasury, who fund it, rather than the Agriculture Ministry. The board of the corporation must have a businessman, an engineer and somebody familiar with land. A scientist must be present, but most of its members were just intended to be part-time business people who would choose the right advice rather than give it, as happens in business. The corporation would recondition lands on behalf of the state independently. It would locate lands for improvement, undertake surveys, dispossess its inhabitants, but perhaps recruiting a few of them if they're particularly talented. The corporation would also talk to agricultural colleges to recruit a new managerial class. Hall wants the route to a career in agriculture to be education and selection based on merit. And then the corporation would give these lands back to the Crown Estate to let them to tenants. And that's it. It's not a very complicated idea. They wanted the government to be an enlightened landlord, a partner in husbandry, and to redesign the land in such a way that it worked in the 20th century. Bigger farms that could make use of technology and economies of scale would hopefully pull British agriculture out of its depression. So that's the plan.
Daniel Hall's the guy's name, and it was all being cooked up by civil servants, because they believed that a Labour government after the war would actually implement this, Martin. They'd looked over, I suppose, at the Soviet Union, seen that some things had worked and some things hadn't when they'd nationalised land, and the idea was to do something similar in Britain.
That's right. And of course, during the war itself, there was planning of food production, just as there was planning of coal production and oil production, because wars are like that. You know, if you want to feed everybody, you've got to have a plan. It won't just happen. I think what's happened in Russia today is quite interesting, because in Lithuania, where I was in the early 90s, they privatised the land and everybody ended up with a tiny little plot, because they'd all previously worked in sovkhoz or kolkhoz, which were cooperative collective farms. But it didn't work, because the small farmers basically were under the thumb of the mafia. And the mafia, actually I had a fight with the mafia in Lithuania, because that's what we exposed this as what they were doing. So in actual fact, all over Eastern Europe, the farming system collapsed during the transition, because all of these big farms that, people previously worked on collapsed.
Can you just say something about Martin? Go on.
Apart from in Belarusia, where Lukashenko, he was a collective farm manager. And he said, it's a bit of a backwater, Belarusia. There's only got 10 million population and it's largely rural. But the old skills of everybody having an independent individual farmer died a couple of generations previously. You know, under the Tsarist regime, people in Belarus would have been peasants answerable to landlords who were from the aristocracy. They took the land over in the revolution, and then, of course, after the collectivization of the land and everybody being put to work in, you know, because don't forget the land over there is quite flat. It makes sense to have big farms so that you can use machinery. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have lots of little small farms, which is what they've got in Poland, in fact. And I was doing a PhD thesis about Polish farming, which I didn't complete. But let's, you know, come back to the
you said something about a fight with the mafia. Do you want to just
the point is
briefly
without
explain
going
what
into
happened
all
there?
of the details, I took some Peruvian community organisers, and we went out to my Shagala, which was outside Vilnius, and there used to be a collective farm there. And when we arrived, there was the collective farm used to have collective facilities. So there would, they had a big community centre which was padlocked and closed. And there were, various public buildings which were all closed. Everybody had been forced to become small farmers, with a cow each or whatever, instead of working together in a collective.
Sounds like this country with our public buildings and pubs padlocked.
The point was we had to meet with the farmers in the church hall, which was the only public building still available. And of course, these farmers were very unhappy with the situation. The mafia basically controlled what went on in the place. Yeah. So the farmers have to sell their milk to the mafia for, 1 litre as it was then.
So what year is this?
This is 93.
Okay, yeah.
And of course, when that milk's taken to Vilnius to be sold to the punters, it's sold for 15 litres. So there's a massive amount.
They sound like British supermarkets.
Well, it's worse than that. These guys basically would break your legs if you tried to go around them. And of course, they really didn't like what we were doing because these Peruvian women were getting them all going, and the mafia decided that because they were standing at the back of the room growling, glaring, and of course they then threatened to kill me, run me out of the country. But I don't want to go back into all that detail. That's just a lot. But what was interesting about that is Belarus is just over the border from Lithuania, and what Lukashenko did and why he's popular in Belarus, he said, we're not changing anything. We're going to carry on with collective farms. Because in the rest of Eastern Europe, the collective farm system collapsed, and it was a disaster. It wasn't actually good for people to have the collective farm system collapse. It had actually been, if it's properly managed, big farms which employ lots of people are viable. And we can see that right now in the Russian Federation, where what's happened is the collective farms have been privatized, but as going businesses. So they've been bought out by private investors, but they still run it as a big business. They don't break it up into little family farms. Now, family farms make sense in some kinds of terrain. Yeah, it doesn't make sense in Austria where you've got big mountains and so on to have big farms. It doesn't make sense because you can't get the machinery in anyway. But in flat places, it makes a lot of sense to have a big farm and employ lots of people and give them job security. So modern Russian farming is not like family farming in the US or Britain. It's still a big collective enterprise. You work for a company which employs hundreds or thousands of people, but it's far more efficient than Western farming. And of course, the Russians have now become major exporters of grains and sunflower seeds and all this sort of stuff, which they were always capable of doing. The problem with the communist system was it was just mismanaged. People basically didn't have a commercial approach to what they were doing, and of course and it just became a big drain, and nobody was making any effort.
Go back to land nationalisation here for a minute. I mean, this chap, he was knighted, Sir Daniel Hall, and he came out with one of the work that has been reviewed on the web page I'm looking at here is called Reconstruction and the Land by Sir Daniel Hall. So 20 years ago, he wrote a book on the future of farming in which he urged the need for larger farms to take advantage of the new machinery then coming into being. So the idea is the actual units of the farms would be larger, but this would imply breaking up the massive old feudal estates, of course, to obtain the large amounts of capital needed and to carry through the reorganisation of agricultural methods. State help was necessary, which could be given freely only if the state reaped the benefits by purchasing the land. So Daniel now returns to the same subject, he says, and in the light of his intervening experience, deals also with the administrative problems which would be raised by the reforms he advocates. And the book under review begins with a summary of the history of British agriculture, from the story of the manor and open field subsistence husbandry from medieval times by way of enclosure and money farming to the marketing acts and the latest policies of protection and subsidy. So sounds like a bit of a history of farming that he decided, right, well, I've learned a whole load of lessons by developing this system, being told to go away, and interesting fellow. So I'll put a link up to that book, that is to say, Sir Daniel Hall's book, Reconstruction and the Land, that from 1941, I think that one was. But Martin, let's get back to today, right? Because we've also got a lot of farmers very upset about having to give up their farms and finding that the government really doesn't seem to like them anymore. This is again from Farming Explained, where a couple of, I think it's he's looking at how the death duties are affecting farmers right now.
These new death duties on farmers means that my demographic are going to be squeezed out of existence in the same way. But we don't parasitically live off rents. We produce stuff. We are working people, and you need us because we produce food. No farmers, no food. We are not a parasitic landlord class. We work, and if you destroy us, you are destroying the food system. This is the problem with the Labour Party's reform. The threshold is far too low. Our farm will be hit really badly, and it's almost unusually small. I think it would be much better to invoke the spirit of David Lloyd George and raise the new threshold to just above whatever was considered to be the maximum reasonable size for a farm. I would suggest 1,000 acres is a reasonable size for a farm. Nobody needs more than 1,000 acres to make a good living. So above the value of 1,000 acres, you could implement new death duties, but at a much higher rate than 20%. Rip the money out of the wealthy. The Crown Estate, the King, for example, has 287,000 acres. You could rip a lot of money out of that if you tax it at 50% over a certain value when the King pops his clogs. However, I feel that the government has not had a proper look at this, because if you tax the rich landowners who don't work, that would mean land changes hands, and that can have unforeseen consequences. It would be lovely if King Charles's estate could be hit by death duties and divided up neatly into farms varying between 250 and 500 acres in size, farms that could be bought by ordinary people who wanted to be farmers and live on the land. But life is not that easy. The Tenant Farmers Association, representing farmers who don't own their own land and instead pay rent to landlords, is very concerned about the impacts of this change. They say the tax changes to be introduced from April 2026 could lead to a significant amount of land disposals from private estates, as we saw when death duty rates caused the breakup of rural estates in the middle of the 20th century, referring to Lloyd George's measures. Such disposals would be immensely damaging to the let sector of agriculture. The Tenant Farmers Association proposed to allow 100% inheritance tax relief to all land let for periods of 10 plus years. This would have driven more sustainable farm tenancies, created a secure rural economy and protected traditional let estates, whilst hitting those landlords who continued to take a short-term approach to the management of their land. The 1 million tax-free exemption may help small owner-occupiers, but it will not help small tenant farmers on large estates, particularly those occupying under insecure farm business tenancies. We could see the loss of many small family farms. You could argue that the erosion of aristocratic estates would be a good thing, and I would agree with you, but it would only be a good thing if tenants were able to buy the land. But tenants won't be able to buy their own land because land prices are absurdly high. They'll be forced out. And he says it benefits small owner-occupiers, but it only benefits really small owner-occupiers. We'll be hit by it. This is a disaster for the entire agricultural sector. The landlord class are going to be hit badly by this. Owner-occupiers are going to be hit badly by this. Small owner-occupiers like us are going to be hit badly by this. And tenant farmers who don't even own their own land are going to be hit badly by this. As you know, I hate the aristocracy as much as the next man, but this reform is so profoundly misguided and ham-fisted. I think we need reforms to land tenure in this country to allow new entrants into the industry and make the rural way of life accessible, but screwing over existing owner-occupiers like us and taxing landlords in such a way that it means their tenants live in a state of chronic insecurity is not the way. The Labour Party need to think much harder about the implications of this policy. Lloyd George's death duties and the Labour Party's own settlement after the war targeted the landlord class in a way that empowered those beneath them. Aristocratic estates were broken up and in many cases were sold to the tenants, who became owner-occupiers freed from their feudal bonds. But when these taxes force us to sell off some of our fields, the opposite will happen. The land will not be bought by some bright-eyed new entrant into the industry because it would be impossible to meet the value of land by farming it. The fields would probably be bought by some rich person who was buying £1 million worth of land so they could pass their wealth to their children while avoiding inheritance tax through agricultural property relief.
Yeah, so what he's saying there is that you can't actually buy the land by farming it in the future. And what the inheritance tax is doing is it's making sure that if you thought that you could save it up through a few generations and then make it all work, you can't anymore.
Well, it was always difficult anyway. I mean, getting into farming, if you don't have a load of money or inherit something, is virtually impossible.
Well, that's Ollie. Well, there used to be these little start-up farms, county farms all over the country, which were gotten rid of by, I think it was the 1990s. Most of those were sold off, or the 2000s. But that was Ollie. He's a small farmer in Leicestershire, and he runs this excellent little channel called Farming Explained, which I'll put a link up to that and the versions of those interviews on our show page at thisweek.org.uk. We will get round to looking at the world wars and an update before the end of the show, but I'm just doing a kind of deep dive here into this whole business of what is going to be the effect of inheritance tax. He's saying there, Martin, it's totally misguided, but of course if you're a hedge fund or you're a private equity firm wanting to buy up some land to put solar panels on it or something, this is brilliant.
Well, I've obviously these proposals have only just been made, so everybody's responding to what's been said in the budget. There's quite a good article in The Guardian today by another farmer saying that it's, it needs tweaking. It was the guy writing in The Guardian, whose name I've forgotten, was saying 1 million is too small. You need to make, say, 3 million. Because what
he's saying there is 1,000. If you've got in fact, it makes a fantastic point. If you've got a farm that's over 1,000 acres, like the King has,
yeah,
but he won't pay any inheritance tax.
But you see, getting farming right isn't just about getting farming right. It's actually the first step to industrialisation for many developing countries.
Well, it's the first taste of civilization, really.
Well, it is. I mean, going back to the agricultural revolution, the original agricultural Neolithic revolution 10,000 years ago. You see, in Japan and in South Korea, because of the communist takeover in China, where they basically redistributed the land, the landlord class was eliminated. I mean, literally eliminated. Many of them died as a result of the fact that it was a very violent transformation. But in order to prevent the communists taking over in Southeast Asia, the Americans, was a guy called Ladinsky, who was actually originally a Ukrainian landowning class that he came from, but he was actually an American. And he pushed the idea, this is in the early 1960s, that the Americans should insist on land reform in developing countries to prevent communism, because the communists were able to appeal to the landless and the poor and say, look, you are peasants.
Well, actually, of course,
join our revolution and we'll give you some land.
I mean, the capitalists want the land. That's that's the reason why they wouldn't do that.
What happened was, in Japan, is the traditional landlord class, they weren't physically eliminated, but they lost, the land was given to the tenant farmers.
Well, there is,
and that, of course, was a way of ensuring loyalty to the new imperial regime in Japan, but it also actually meant that you can then the way in Britain industrialised was by driving people off the land and forcing them into factories. Whereas the way Southeast Asia industrialised, Taiwan, South Korea, China itself, is by giving tenant farmers security of tenure so that they can actually just make a living on the land. And then, of course, you're able to draw out extra labour resources from that and put them into factories as you build them,
and also
rather than pushing everybody into slums.
Attracting people into the cities rather than just driving them off the land.
Attracting them into the cities rather than drive. And, of course, the same thing happened in Poland.
Can we talk about Ireland for a minute?
Well,
because Ireland is actually a really good model of the estates being transferred. So what happened there was you had loads of extremely poor tenant farmers who were given these amazing good rates loans to buy the land that they were tenanting off of the feudal landowners, the aristocracy, and to build a nice little house on it. We're talking about after the famine period during the Irish Land League. That worked really well. Lots of small family farms that there are in Ireland is a model, really, I think.
It is, but of course the land in Ireland ultimately belongs to the state. It doesn't belong to the Crown. And of course, you can read
the Crown or the state don't really intervene, do they? They just let you get on with it.
Well, no, in Ireland, in fact, it's very rarely put into practice. But in Ireland, if you've got land and you're not using it, in theory, it can be confiscated from you and given to somebody else who will
Interesting idea.
use it.
You should be tenanting it out at the very least. Anyway.
That's because in principle, underlying all of this, the land is actually everybody's.
Anyway,
national. It belongs to everybody.
Ollie, it is in Russia apparently, but not here. It's the king's.
Well, that's the problem. Is the blockage in this country is the feudal rights that go back to 1066.
This is all in Kevin's book, Who Owns the World, which looks at literally it's rather than a gazetteer which is Who Owns Britain is all around the counties. His is all around the different countries. Who Owns the World. So. We heard from Ollie over in Leicestershire, Farming Explained. What about the funky farmer in Gloucestershire?
I couldn't believe it when they announced it, because I honestly don't think they understood what the farming community and farming people would feel.
Well, it's like ripping an arm off.
Yeah, totally.
You know, it's like knowing that when I retire, I've got to give one of my children away so I can keep the other ones. It is. You know, because your farm is
it's your life.
It is your life.
It's your life. You build it, you love it. You walk around that farm and everyone knows what I think of the trees on our farm. I walk around and I see that oak tree and I, particularly the trees I planted when I was a kid and stuff.
Apart from the squirrels. Squirrels.
But you're the same, you know, you walk around that land and you've cared for it, haven't you?
Well, I'm the 4th generation there and I'll be the 9th generation over there.
Yeah.
So it's part of the family. I mean, I know there are some folks out there that go, oh, well, we're really glad it's happening because it's going to give us a chance to buy some land and maybe do some farming ourselves. And I kind of get that, for there will be some people, but there are also people that are just going to come out from the cities and go, oh, I'll buy that bit of land and I'll be Jeremy Clarkson.
Yeah.
You know, I'll have 5 acres and I'll ride my motorboat round it and I'll maybe plant some spuds or something, and then they'll fail and...
I think the sad thing is you've got a position now where some farmers are going to go, just what's the point? I mean, we've battled here for years to keep this place going, and we've been approached for solar farms innumerable times.
Ditto.
And I absolutely do not want a solar farm on my land. Okay, if some farmers do that, I understand it. But for me, it'll break my heart to see this place called covered in solar. But you do start thinking, you know, what's the point?
Yeah.
You know, at the moment,
we're custodians, though, aren't we?
Yeah, you know, and we love it, and we want to love it, and we want the next generation to love it and stuff.
Yeah.
But what they don't seem to, I can't understand how the Labour Party think this, for not just for farming but for businesses, is that you take your 20% off. So what you're doing then, you either say, okay, that business has got to pay that 20% off over 10 years, they say. Well, a farm business doesn't generate that sort of money. I can tell you that now.
No.
But also, the other option then is to sell some of that business. Well, what have you done then? You've
made the business
less viable.
Yeah.
And then what? So then the next generation, if they can keep going with that, have then got a smaller business that potentially at the end of their lives they have to sell another chunk. You're breaking it down into...
I think most businesses, if they looked at the figures for agriculture and then find out what the margins are,
shocking.
there'd be a case of, why'd you do it?
I know.
Why'd you do it? I mean, if you're in business, you're looking at, if it's 15% or more margin, well, yeah, that's kind of okay, but we're working on 3, 4, 5% if we're lucky.
Well,
on some years.
One chap emailed me and he said that his beef unit, and sometimes they make £25,000 a year profit, sometimes they lose 25,000.
Yeah, but how much is he spending to make that amount of money?
I know.
It's not costing him 25,000 to make 25,000.
No.
It's probably costing him $250,000.
If you look at the asset value, it'd be ridiculous. The returns don't stack up, do they?
No.
And so, okay, so you could argue that we've got to pay inheritance tax like everyone else then, but so what the Labour Party haven't said is, okay, so you've got to pay that money back. I tell you what, why don't you get a really good fair market price for your produce so that you can pay that?
Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
Why can't I sell my milk at, say, £3 a litre?
Yeah. Forget the subsidies and all that. We don't need that.
Forget that. Why don't we have... we pay capital gains tax, we pay inheritance tax. Hey, I tell you what, you guys can have the market price that will afford that.
Give us the means to do it.
Give us the means to make a decent living and pay off this capital gains tax not capital gains tax, sorry, inheritance tax.
Well, capital gains is going to have us as well, isn't it?
Well, it is, obviously.
It's one way or the other. You sell some land to pay the tax, and the land is worth 4 times what your granddad paid for it 100 years ago, so you've got to pay the tax on the difference.
It's scary, isn't it?
So it's whichever way you go.
But this is the whole problem, and this is what really annoyed me about people slagging farmers like myself off, in the fact they're saying, you can afford it. You can afford it as the asset value, but the return on the farm has always been historically low, and it's kind of almost that inheritance tax exemption sort of made up for that.
All the wealth is in the asset, which is the land. There's no cash wealth, or very little cash wealth.
So that's the funky farmer from Gloucestershire. It's what he said towards the end there, Martin, is quite amazing, isn't it? That yes, you're going to have to pay your inheritance tax on your 1,000-acre farm or whatever. That means you're going to have to sell a quarter of the farm. But the thing is, you have to pay capital gains tax on that land that you're selling to pay the inheritance tax too. So not only have you been taxed for the money that was originally paid to buy the farm, you're now being taxed to sell it.
Well, I think the most interesting thing he said there is, why don't we give us the prices so that we can actually make some more money?
Well, maybe the supermarkets really are the mafia.
Well, that's right. That's the issue. What was driving down the poor little farmers in Lithuania all those years ago was they've got to sell to the mafia. So it was like the supermarkets here, but more so with guns, And I think these are the issues. I mean, farming in developed countries, apart from places like New Zealand and so on, is actually very marginal, because it is actually cheaper. I mean, the Dunedin, first refrigeration ship.
Big farms there. Yeah, very big.
Yeah, well, the Dunedin, which was one of the first refrigeration ships, docked in the port of London in 1888, and that made the whole of British sheep production for lamb it was just uncompetitive. It was cheaper to have lambs running around in the South Island of New Zealand, put them in a refrigeration ship, and that's cheaper in London than a lamb that was it was grown in that had been developed in Wales. Now, this is fundamental. You can't actually, some countries are well disposed for, agriculture is viable there. In Argentina, the beef production is much cheaper than our beef production.
Patagonia,
they've got huge areas to put it in.
Patagonia.
Yeah, the same in Venezuela. Now the thing is that if you want to have agriculture, and I think you do. I mean, obviously in the 2 world wars.
I hope so.
In the 2 world wars, which is when, the guy had put his plan together for what to do with farming after the war, is
Sir Daniel Hall.
Yeah, because if you're in a war, you really do need to grow, you need to grow your own food, because otherwise it's got to be brought in by ships which can be sunk by a U-boat.
Security, isn't it?
Yes, it's security.
Well, just about half of our food, we grow about half the food that we eat.
Yeah, that's right. But I mean, and it's gone down, we used to under the Common Agricultural Policy, we used to have a higher proportion of food that we grew ourselves. But in any case, if you want to have that, you've got to plan for it. If you just have a free market in farming, then what will happen is the US has been pushing. They've been subsidising what they do for years, so that they can undersell everybody else, so that they can use it as a means of control of developing countries.
Shall
they dump loads of wheat on people.
Shall we listen to our head planner at the National Farmers Union Conference, Sir Keir Starmer?
I mean, I want to thank you for that leadership and thank this room for that leadership, because it's very, very important, and for your openness in always not only listening to Labour's case, but rightly challenging us when we get things wrong. The best decisions, in my experience, are the ones that are held up to the right light and survive scrutiny. And the worst decisions are the ones that have never been challenged. And let me assure this room that openness will be reciprocated by my government if we win the election next year. And, Conference, what I hear from Minette, what I heard on the farm this morning, is the same as I hear from businesses across the country. The need for certainty, for stability, for a long-term strategy. This is not the place to waste words on the government. But make no mistake, they aren't going to get this. They aren't going to understand the chaos that they've caused and what the cost is. I don't think they can change themselves, and they won't change our country. They're part of the broken system that creates that feeling, that lack of respect for communities across Britain. Short-term crisis management instead of long-term solutions. I call it sticking plaster politics. And it's at the heart of so many challenges that grip our country right now. Distracted by short-term obsessions that fixate Westminster, held back by a cynicism which uses low trust in politics as an excuse to narrow our ambitions, and blinkered to the potential of an active government setting the direction. We lurch from crisis to crisis, always reacting, always behind the curve, a sticking plaster, never a cure. Unable to raise our sights and nurture a collective sense of mission. And farming is a cut and dry example of this. You're going through a huge transition with the environmental land management schemes. In the main, a good transition. A system that rewards public good is right. We can't lose sight of food production. We can't lose sight of farming as a business. But sometimes, because of the sheer breadth of farming's contribution, its social importance to the environment and nature, to the countryside, its way of life and our national identity, we lose sight of farming's ultimate goal. We need that contribution, and we need sustainable food production. You can have both, and Labour will work with you to get both. The conference, look, I know this shift is everything to British farming. The stakes are so high, livelihoods are on the line. Rolling these schemes out well is the difference between viable farming businesses and abandoned farms. We can't have underspends in the allocated money. We can't have farmers struggling whilst they wait for the right SFI standards to be announced. We can't have everyone burnt out by the bureaucracy and constantly moving goalposts. It's too important, especially now in this trading environment. Your input costs, energy, fertiliser, feed, gone through the roof. But the market pressure, the social pressure, which comes with rising food prices, that still remains. You don't need me to tell you all about that. That every day seems to bring a new existential risk to British farming. From bovine TB to avian flu and dramatic changes to our climate. Or that losing a farm is not like losing any other business. It can't come back. That's why the lack of urgency from the government, the lack of attention to detail, the lack of long-term planning, it's not on. You deserve better than that. You deserve a government that listens, that heeds early warnings, that shows the level of ambition needed to tackle the challenges you face.
So that's Sir Keir Starmer, now the Prime Minister. But at that point, he was Leader of the Opposition, talking last year to the National Farmers Union annual conference. Now, I wonder if he will be listening on Tuesday week. Just looking at the various farming newspapers like Farmers Weekly, they say the London rally due to take place on the 19th of November is now at full capacity. Unregistered farmers are being told by the National Farmers Union not to travel to London. Well, I wonder if they'll take any notice of that. Organised by the NFU, the mass lobby of MPs will take place at the Church House Conference Centre in Westminster on Tuesday the 19th of November. The absolutely inept NFU have booked a hall which has a capacity of 600 people, and of course that's nowhere near enough for all the farmers that want to come, so maybe they should have booked a bigger hall. Maybe they should have used some sort of like arena style thing. Who knows? But obviously the weather might not be too good. But so they're now saying that they're going to have 3 rotations of a rally and speeches and that sort of thing, so that they're going to have like 3 loads of farmers going through, which sounds ridiculously bureaucratic. Anyway, do you think that the government will listen to this, Martin, as the farmers fight back against this inheritance tax, which of course the King doesn't pay?
Well, I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? Is the biggest, the elephant in the room is that it's things like that. And the other elephant in the room is the blowing up of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which has created all of these problems, price pressures, because we've decided we wanted to pick a fight with the Russians, and the Americans then blew up the pipeline. And of course, things like that affect farmers, because of course the fuel prices go through the roof and everything else goes through the roof, including the price of groceries. So you can't separate really farming from every other aspect of what's going on. And of course, the real danger we were discussing earlier in this podcast is that there's going to be a collapse in the global economy. And of course, at that point, farmers will go bankrupt. Most Polish farmers are already bankrupt. They're very small farmers over there. And of course, because of the war in the Ukraine, the Ukrainian big farmers, because they were taken over by corporate farms in Ukraine, have been dumping their grain into the European Union market, which is actually disastrous, not just for Polish farmers that are right on the front line of it, but it's causing problems right across the European continent. And this is to do with geopolitics. Farming isn't separate from all of these other things.
No. But it is made separate if you decide that you're going to impose a specific tax, which is designed to kick families off the land.
It's not designed to do that. It might do that.
It is designed by the World Economic Forum and by these, people like BlackRock. They don't want those farmers owning that land.
No, they don't. They certainly don't in Ukraine, because in Ukraine it was a part of the law that foreigners couldn't own land in the Ukraine, so that Ukrainians could be farmers. But Zelensky's ripped that up.
Yeah. Well, who is he working for? Ukrainians or?
Well, we know he's working for. He's working for the World Economic Forum. Well, that's right.
Economic Forum, yeah.
Now, if you want to protect farming all over the world, you've got to listen to farmers, but you can't presume. Some farmers are just not efficient. There's no right to be a farmer anymore. There's a right to be a miner or anything else.
No, we need to take a few lessons from the Irish on how to do farming. Anyway, the Jim Rogerson, he works in the farming industry. He's not a farmer himself, but I spoke to him this week, and he thinks a lot of this is connected up with the chemical industry, providing things like the pesticides and the fertilizers for farming, and also he links this a little bit to the pharmaceutical industry too, who have a big say. In fact, they make a lot of money particularly out of livestock farming.
The climate change lobby have so many half-truths. You can't say they tell lies, but the problem is they're so economical with telling the truth. In reality, what the public hear is lies. It's just so... I had one as a counsellor on Monday night. I listened to somebody on carbon literacy training. And they're just so economical with the truth, blaming cattle for it. And yet, ruminant animals grazing grass is probably one of the best carbon capture the world has. But the global corporations aren't making money out of that. It's not good for you. I mean, and food health. Coincidentally, it's 3 weeks on Saturday, I attended a brain health conference in Manchester. I paid to go myself. I heard about it and I thought it was interesting. I want to go. And doctors come together, people from all over this country and a doctor from Australia, talking about how natural food is healing all sorts of problems. It is phenomenal. Big Pharma don't like people eating natural food because there's no money in it for them.
See, this is it, isn't it? Farmer and farmer. So you've got the pharmaceutical industry and you've got farmers. Now, you're talking about the pharmaceutical industry, aren't you?
Yeah, yeah. And it is a big thing for them because in the pharmaceutical industry and the chemical companies that supply fertilizer or all the sprays that sprayed on crops. If you look in a supermarket, all the fruit and veg, how much of that is grown naturally now? And most of it will be grown with hydroponics and artificial fertilizer and all the chemicals. It's not really natural food. People don't see that. And everything we're doing appears to be trying to destroy natural food. Look at the thing with the chickens. Wanting everybody, if you've got a chicken in your backyard, everybody has to register your chicken. It seems to be they're attacking anybody that wants to be sustainable, self-sustainable. We've got to attack it. Stop people being able to feed themselves. It's just frightening. In my mind now, I feel that the globalists seem to be, they see food as having a 12-month, 2-year shelf life, powdered, dried in a packet, like a pot noodle. So there's no weight to it. They can ship it or sail it, whatever, transport it around the world for nothing because it's all dried. There's no weight to it. So it's all been through a factory, all been processed. The public need to question what they are actually eating. And one of the doctors that was speaking when I was on this brain health conference actually said that in reality, that most of the stuff, 90% of the stuff sold by a supermarket should really be coming with a public health warning. It's frightening. But, I mean, there's doctors, if you start looking for, with natural cured, doctors around the world curing brain diseases who certainly see massive improvements in a lot of these mental illnesses and Alzheimer's and dementia and all these things by people eating natural food. And if anybody wants to look, just what's gone on with Dr. Malcolm Kendrick and she's from Monmouth, Zoe Arkham, with the Mail on Sunday, having to print an apology for slating them over the statin issue. I mean, it's colossal, but the money made by these big pharmaceutical companies, big pharma, from these drugs is colossal. And anything that attacks their base to sell produce has to be shut down.
Well, it's funny you say that because I just bought some tomatoes last week and some plums from the supermarket, and neither of them, Jim, tasted of anything. They tasted like sort of pulpy stuff, which was mostly water. I wonder whether that old Tom and Barbara Good series, there was something actually quite deep in that, because they were saying, they were a couple that went for a hippie couple that went for self-sufficiency. And what you're saying is you think that's the absolute antithesis of what the real global power brokers want.
Yeah, they don't want that. They want control. If it goes forever if you look into it, and I have looked into it, and I listen to doctors that are only telling you to eat natural food. They are curing people of all sorts of illnesses globally by getting people eating natural food that we used to eat 50 or 60 years ago.
I suppose, see, that's Jim Rogerson there speaking to me earlier this week. It's the old argument about processed food, Martin, isn't it? I think they want to turn the human need to have maybe, a little kitchen garden and to have food from the local area, organic food, like all food used to be before the fertilizers and the pesticides and around the time of the Second World War became de rigueur. That was normal. Now it's not. It's processed. 90% of it processed.
Well, he's right there. It's about control, isn't it? The pharmaceutical companies and the suppliers of inputs to farmers, they want to control what's produced. And but farming is different in different countries for to do with the geography of those countries and what sort of things are viable in these different countries. But ultimately, of course, it's in many countries in the world, this struggle to have access to land, like the Movimento Sem Terra in Brazil, where landless people try to take over what's basically vacant land, but is owned by big landowners, and then they're put down with brutality by the pistoleros who the latifundists employ.
It seems to me the land is like the beginning of everything, really, and the idea is to get sort of privatise it. But anyway, I also talked to Jim about whether he thought, and you can guess the answer, there was any solution through the political process to any of this.
I'm not sure. I will reserve comment on that. To be honest, I've got so fed up. I've lost interest. I don't know who else you could pick from anyway. I've just lost total interest in it. I mean, although in principle I was always a conservative at heart, certainly at the moment, unless they really get their act together, I couldn't see me ever voting for them again. But, you're stuck who to vote for. Yeah, I think it showed in the election, because Labour did not win the last election. They got the most seats, but Keir Starmer only got about 90% of the votes that Jeremy Corbyn got in 2019. They were saying what such a massive victory it were. Hang on, when you didn't get as many as Jeremy Corbyn got, that's not a massive victory. It shows that even the Labour people weren't turning out for Labour. So, yeah, I mean, they've got the seats, but it's not a true reflection of how the country feels, really. There was a very low turnout, so people stopped at home. Yes, they got the most votes and technically they're in charge, but it was hardly any singing endorsement of the policy, was it?
It wasn't, was it?
No, it wasn't, but it's always been. I mean, Margaret Thatcher never got anything like 50% of the votes in this country. But as we were talking about earlier with our Workers' Party comrade, that she managed to push through the neoliberal policy which ruined British industry, even though she didn't have majority support.
Well, and also wrecked the economy.
Well, indeed, that's right. But it served the various interests that were behind the Conservative Party at the time. And that's what happened. Our system isn't democratic. You mentioned Ireland earlier. In Ireland, they do have a single transferable vote in multiple member constituencies.
Well, they didn't when the land went back.
No, they did after they kicked the British out in 1920.
Well, they did actually have British MPs in Ireland. Well,
they did. And at one stage, the Irish held a balance of power inside the British Parliament in Westminster, which actually caused all sorts of problems for over 100 years. And of course,
it was. You can call it a problem, but the Irish don't call it that. Well, they call it wonderful.
Well, no. But what happened? As Roy Hasterdy said many years ago, if you're not interested in the Irish question, you've got no business in British politics. The Irish question has dominated British politics for 200 years. There's going to be an election in Ireland on November the 29th, I think, and of course it will be under a non-first past the post system, which will reflect pretty closely the votes that people cast.
And put the old empire to shame. So final clip from Jim is where he looks here at how we're getting ever more processed food, and also how he beat type 2 diabetes with diet.
To me, it's the public they need. The public need to wake up to the fact that the food security isn't there. If you're happy eating insect protein, which, we're being told we're going to get, and ground up cereals in like muesli bar or something like that that's bland, to a pot noodle, good luck to you. But it's certainly not a nutritious food. I mean, got told I was type 2 diabetic nearly 18 months ago, beginning of July last year, 23. And they wanted to put me on metformin straight away, did the doctors. They weren't going to let me out. And I said, well, you're wasting your time giving it because I will not take it. I'll sort this out with diet. And the big argument, you'll never get your blood sugar down with diet alone. I said, give me a chance. Within 6 months, I halved it without doing anything silly by just cutting carbs out. I really hammered the carbs. Very rarely I eat a potato at home. Don't really eat potatoes at home. I eat very little bread. I do eat a bit of a soft up time, odd cakes and biscuits, but I try to keep it very low. If I go out for a meal, I will eat, the potatoes and veg that come, but I would never put extra on my plate now. And if it was carvery or self-service, I'd be look for everything with the maximum meat to it. I do eat a lot of meat now and a lot of cheese. But I lost weight. I'd been having, well, not say I was trouble breathing. They were saying I had at the doctors. But I literally really got the blood sugar down. He lost weight, improved, purely cutting carbs back. And yet they're telling us we all need to eat carbs. It's the carbs that's making everybody ill.
So that's a wise chap from Lancashire, Jim Rogerson. I'll put the full version of that up on our show page at thisweek.org.uk later. I mean, he's talking about the relationship between the pharmaceutical industry, the chemical industry, and farming and land. But he winds up there, Martin, talking about how he managed to do a completely natural and no profits for the pharmaceutical industry solution to type 2 diabetes.
Well, I mean, it's
for himself.
Yes, I mean, obviously these big companies have got their vested interests, and they want I mean, what's it Bill Gates is into? He wants to create, what they call sustainable farming, which is in fact just dominated by the companies which he owns. And that's why he's buying up land all over the world and all the rest of it.
I suppose it's sustainable because he's got the money and you haven't.
Well, I mean, it's just the word sustainable doesn't mean anything in that context at all. It's just a load of sustainable farming is small farmers in Brazil, for example, perhaps organised into cooperatives, growing food for their own families.
Yeah, but if they can't pass it on to their kids, it's not sustainable, is it?
Well, no, because don't forget, it's not a question of the passing on to the kids. These people tend to work collectively, so that they've only got what they call roçaristas, so they've only got a tiny bit of land, but they have to work together in order to make it viable. But of course, the big problem in all developing countries, as Michael Hudson has pointed out, is the World Bank and the IMF have pushed developing countries to grow tropical products, things like palm oil, bananas, stuff that we need, but they won't let countries develop a food system which allows them to feed their own people from their own resources. That's exactly what has happened in Japan, China, South Korea, Taiwan, as I mentioned earlier. Small farmers are still very powerful there, and they are allowed to grow food which is mainly for local consumption. In Brazil, the land is owned by big latifundistas and corporations, and they produce cattle in totally inappropriate circumstances in the Amazon, which is then turned into beef burgers which are eaten in the United States. That is not a rational way to organise.
No, I think this is going to be the last look we have at the whole land situation. Particularly, obviously, we'll be reporting on the demo. The National Farmers Union look like they're massively oversubscribed. Poor chaps on the 19th, Tuesday week. But Martin, we've got a new emperor. As we said earlier, Donald Trump has promised to stop wars and things like that. At the same time, we're hearing before he becomes president, this week we had B-52 bombers moving over to Israel or into the Middle East. Anyway, today they've announced US F-15 fighter jets. US F-15 fighter jets are now arrived in the Middle East.
Yeah, well, the point is...
They're getting ready for it, aren't they?
Well, they are, but the B-52 bombers that they've sent to Qatar, if they try and take off to attack Iran, they will be attacked on the ground before they take off. They need to actually put them in Diego Garcia.
Hang on. What, you mean on the runway as they're taking off?
Yeah, because they're too close. The military problem for the West is that in order to attack Iran, they need to be further back. Yeah, they're too close. The Iranians will be able to all of the US bases in the Middle East are in fact just sitting targets, as are their aircraft carriers. They haven't got any hypersonic missiles.
Well, they don't want to attack, the Iranians don't want to attack Qatar, do they? Because they're quite friendly with the Qataris.
Well, the Qataris have told the Americans you're not to use this base to attack Iran. But whether the Americans will take any notice is another matter. Maybe the Qatari armed forces will have to start killing the Americans and others that are on their territory.
So is this, do you think, the Democrats and the Biden deep state trying to up the ante before Trump gets in?
I think what they're saying about Ukraine is they're going to give them loads and loads of money and weaponry before Trump arrives in the White House on January the 6th, so that, it's a fait accompli and he can't do anything about it. I'm quite sure that the deep state in the US will be trying to Trump-proof their various war plans.
And will the Bilderberg, former boss of the CIA, Mike Pompeo, do you think he'll appear in Trump's cabinet?
Well, this is what people have been looking at over the last 48 hours is who's Trump going to appoint to his cabinet? And if Pompeo's in there, then war's definitely on, because he's a madman.
Okay. Also, Taiwan has received its first batch of HIMARS from the United States. So that way, it does seem to me as if there's all sorts of interesting little news stories going on, which are to do with upping the ante in these various global conflicts by the United States, whilst Biden's still so-called in power.
Well, don't forget that Trump is very much in favour of sending missiles to Taiwan. He doesn't want to fight the Russians because he wants to fight the Chinese. That's what the big row. I mean, in the upper class in the United States, they row with each other about which country we're going to go to war with first. Is it going to be China, or is it going to be Russia, or is it going to be Iran? And of course, the Iranians, the Russians and the Chinese, many of them speak English and they watch the media and they know that this row's going on. And of course, they know very well that they're all in the firing line. But of course, in actual fact, if you're trying to project power from the North American continent into the Middle East and across the Pacific into China, you're onto, the geography's against you. Yeah, people who are fighting on their own turf are going to have a big advantage to people who are coming from the other. If you're going to send any expeditionary force to invade Iran, the Iranians are going to see it coming a mile off, aren't they? The same if NATO was going to intervene in the Ukraine. They'd have to get all the people trained up. They'd have to put them on ships in the United States and bring them over. But those ships will be sunk by the Russians long before they reach Europe. There's no way that the West and the Americans can win a war against any individual. I mean, they've war gamed fighting with Iran loads of times. They always lose. And if you're going to take three of these countries on simultaneously, you're definitely going to lose. You haven't got enough missiles and 150 millimeter shells to fight in Ukraine. Never mind three different countries. Just to look at
the two wars, the Gaza one first. In Lebanon, extraordinary story. Lebanon's Speaker of their Parliament, Nabi Berri, claimed on Wednesday that the Lebanese Americans had voted for Donald Trump due to a promise made in a cafe in Michigan by the victorious Republican candidate to ensure a ceasefire in Lebanon. In an interview with Mustaqbal Web, Berry was asked about who is the Parliament Speaker, asked about Trump's alleged popularity amongst Lebanese Americans. He signed a written pledge for a ceasefire in Lebanon immediately upon his victory at Hassan Abbas's restaurant, Berry claimed.
Well, one of Trump's daughters, Tiffany, is actually married to a Lebanese businessman, so he's got some influence. The Lebanese have got some influence via that. But of course, Jared Kushner is married to Ivanka, and he's got much more influence, and he's very, very pro-Israeli. So, I mean, Trump has basically promised the Lebanese that he's going to get a ceasefire, and he's promised the Israelis that they can do what they like. And he's promised to, to make everybody happy, and it's going to be great.
And we're also hearing this week that Putin and Trump say they're both ready for talks. So Russian President Vladimir Putin and President-elect Donald Trump each said they were prepared to engage in talks following the election victory of Trump. At the Valdai Forum on Thursday, Russian leader Vladimir Putin said, "I take this opportunity to congratulate Trump," adding that he was ready to speak with the incoming American president. Trump also stated he was prepared to engage with the Kremlin. He told NBC News, "I think we'll speak."
Well, I mean, as far as it goes, that's good news. But you can imagine people like Keir Starmer, Macron, Schulz, von der Leyen, all of these people, you know, we don't talk to Putin. I mean, the only thing necessary, Lindsey Graham, who's one of Trump's big supporters, he said he called for the assassination of Putin. He's so evil that someone should just blow his head off.
And he's not saying anything about Iran.
No, because of course what Bibi Netanyahu wants, he wants a war with Iran, and as Trump said, I was speaking to Bibi this morning, and he just wanted to finish the job. Yeah, I mean, Trump was saying we should be attacking Iranian nuclear facilities.
It does seem to me.
Why don't we get on with it?
The eye of Sauron is swivelling from Ukraine down to the Middle East, and let's wind up this week with Edward Snowden. He did a live link up a couple of weeks ago with a group called Token 2049 in Singapore, where he talks about the high tech, these things like these pager bombs, and the sort of technology that's now being used by the Mossad and the Israeli intelligence and the CIA to fight this Middle Eastern war, which it looks like under Trump will most likely expand.
Now, it's not the first time that we've ever seen a remote bomb. But it is the first time that we've ever seen a broadcast bombing at this scale, a message sent over public communication systems that reaches consumer electronics that are lying in wait, because this is how pagers work, right? It's not like one-to-one these things are chiming back, they're checking in, they're phoning home. They're just listening to the equivalent of radio. They hear the signal and they go off. The person who's triggering it doesn't know who you are. They don't know where you're at. They don't know whether you're holding it, your child is holding it, and demonstrably they do not care. You don't need to take a position on the legitimacy of whatever the hell it is today, Hamas or Hezbollah, or any of Israel's targets, one way or the other, to realize that they have broken a taboo. It is very, very dangerous for the comfortable life that we, in sort of the developed part of the world, have cocooned ourselves with. Nearly every single one of you is carrying a remotely controllable device on your person that you have not opened and inspected for explosives. You probably can't even open it. And even without the explosives, right, you go, oh, I'm not worried about the Mossad, right? The batteries in your phone, in your laptop, in your electric car, they hold tremendous amounts of embodied energy. And even if it's not going to explode in the same violent way, they can absolutely catch fire. You know, you can go look at a line of them on YouTube. These are things that will not far in the future be able to burn your house down while you sleep as it's on the charger in the other room at the push of the button. And who would we blame, right? It wasn't China that started this. And this brings me to the last thing, which is the rejection of our traditions by some in our community. I saw this recently, and I don't want to be unfair to Saylor, the contrary to his point here, because I haven't followed it closely. But I saw someone digging up old quotes here, and they were saying, I'll read this, that we don't need to talk about like the anarchist angles of Bitcoin. We don't want to talk about privacy. We don't want to talk about the uninterceptable design. We don't want to talk about the fact that no one can silence it, no one can stop it. Because that's going to make billionaires uncomfortable. And they want to be investing in something. They want it to be regulated. They want it to be controlled. They want it to be something that works for them. And I think that's absolutely wrong. We need to talk about the rules and values of the system, the crypto part of cryptocurrency. That's what makes it special. I don't care if it makes billionaires uncomfortable. I don't care if it makes JP Morgan slower to allocate. They don't get a vote. Because frankly, they're coming along on this ride whether they like it or not. The dollar is done. Nothing stops this train, as Lynn Alden says it. Debasement is baked into our models. We see what's happening with the percentage of currency issuance, the deficit spending. It might not happen this year. It might not happen next year. It might not happen in 5 years. But it's very clear looking at the progress of history where these things end. We are in the age of paper, but it is on the decline. It is coming to the end. It's not about any flag. It's about the method. It's what the system is built on. There is no basis, no strong foundation. So we as a community need to focus on keeping alive the thing that made our currency prosper, where all the others have failed. Less comfortably, I think it also means recognizing that a lot of altcoin activity doesn't serve much purpose in the crypto space, frankly, beyond the dilution of the broader crypto monetary base. Not all of it, certainly. There are some good projects out there, but every single one of you in the audience can call to an example to mind where you would agree that even if we dress it up nice, it is just the scammiest form of rug lying in wait that you can imagine. And it's happening again and again and again and again. People are seeing it like gambling, okay. Maybe it's like a lottery, okay. But think about the systemic effect that this is having. If it's not cordoned off, if it's not sort of the toxic waste, everyone recognizes it for what it is. And a lot of people don't, I think. People are wising up as a community more broadly. But there's more participants, right? There's a new sucker born every day, as they say. And we shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't be exploiting suckers. We should be building a new world, because we're already there. And with the old system, right, when the government robs you, at least you can look at the road, oh, maybe I helped build that. If this community is instead just merely buying some, useless jackass and even more useless expensive watch, which system is better? We need to be able to answer that as we occupy a more prominent place in the world. We have to do better if we want to live better. So with that, I just say, look, we need to focus on not being a part of the problem. We have an extraordinary opportunity here. We have changed the world in so many ways, and the world is coming around to listen. They are beginning to buy in. They are beginning to participate. They see the value, and we don't even have to argue it anymore. We have a responsibility to be good stewards of the moment in history that has been created by us, for us, and that we will pass to others. And this is to say, when you look at everything happening, when you look at the desperation for a new control over speech, when you look at the rise of these new disruptive technologies of modernity, such as AI, the way it's evolving, it can be great for us. It can also be very terrible for us. It depends on who is holding the levers of power and how we decentralize them. When you look at the new ways consumer electronics are being turned against us, from how they used to be in small individual targeted cases to now mass broadcast level cases, and you see leaders in our space trying to reject our old traditions, the ones that are valuable, the ones that created the space, I think the lessons are clear. And this is to say that we should defy bureaucracy. We should reject modernity. Embrace tradition, and you'll save the world. That's all we have to do. Thank you.
So that's Edward Snowden, whistleblower, Booz Allen Hamilton Chappie, speaking last month in Singapore at Token 2049. But he's bringing up all sorts of things there, Martin, particularly to do with technology, as you'd expect, cryptocurrencies and pager bombs. And what he's implying there is basically they're just running away with this. There's no kind of controls over these things whatsoever.
Well, there isn't, is there? I mean, it's another part of the dystopian future which we seem to be moving towards. But everything's coming to a head all at once, and we will see how it plays out. It'll all be over by Christmas.
You reckon?
Well, that's what they used to say in 1914.
Well, I know. Well, we shall see. He talks about maybe a few years. Who knows? Finally, our poem this week from Patrizia. The subject is obvious. The Don 1. No mockingbird nor CIA, the clan, the Don, the man au fait, with underworld, be man or mouse, who rules the roost, deep state, the house. Corruption, construction in foundations lie, body count, 'tis no surprise, goons and spooks, mob rule, 'tis said. Once you're in, until you're dead. Pick wisely, Don, your ADME trust. If drain the swamp of mob you must, man with roots in all but hair. The clan, this man, the Don did snare. What lies beneath bravado talk? Behind brave words are all the hawks, men with plans in all but face the 47th. Now, put in place. The IMF, the MIC, rules-based order, hegemony. Don on a roll, now thinks he's boss. Obliterate, deep state, his cross. Once in, flash mob, there's no way out. Bilderberg, his boss, no doubt. Soft shoe shuffle is how it goes. Face off, face up, step on toes. Goons and spooks and CIA, the mafia come out to play. A tangled web, dark forces weaved. The voters lose, ere be deceived. No wriggle room, or perhaps he could drain the swamp, this time for good. AIDS hand-picked to surround the Don. Swamp life creatures ne'er be gone. Nowhere to run when in so deep. Bidding done, so life may keep. Bilderberg, rule the roost from USA to Mother Goose. Stay home, Don, mend your fences, surround yourself with no pretences, pack up your bases, mend your roads, deliver to your voters loads. Make health and wealth a gift for all, if wriggle room, big pharma fall. The bricks are forced to reckon with, let others be, and let live. The US of A no longer be a rule-based order naturally. So do what you can with what you've got. The genocide in Gaza, stop. Hands off Iran and Russia too. Nose keep out on others too. Reward your voters, your loyalty give. Each one a chance, nice life to live. Oh, to dream this dream, the dawn, in rhyme with hope, 'tis never wrong. A dance, behold, perhaps a test, God-given chance to do your best. And she finishes with a quote from Donald Trump. We should not let this be like the history of the mafia, which was allowed to grow into a nationwide organisation which infiltrated and corrupted so many areas of society for such a long period of time. That's what Donald Trump said. So that's all for this week. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to Patricia, also to our guests. That is Andy Hudd from ASLEF and from the Workers' Party. He's their deputy leader, one of three deputy leaders. Also, of course, to David Miller, Dr. David Miller, the sociologist and author of many books, and also things like Spinwatch. And there's he does a website about power too, which is one of the things that he started. And also, of course, to Irish Republican Labour activist Martin Summers, to Jim Rogerson, terrific little interview that, which I'll put up on our show page, as I will with the others at thisweek.org.uk, and of course, to Dave Bazanko, our sound engineer. I'm Shadow Banned on Twitter at Tony Gosling. All the bits and bobs for the show, including those longer interviews, are at thisweek.org.uk. Thanks to everyone that sent me in some of the clips from this week, including what you'll hear, the podcasters will hear at the beginning of the podcast. Thanks very much for that. Extremely appropriate for the US elections. And I'm sure if you're the person that sent that in, you know exactly what I mean. This show is repeated at 11 p.m. Fridays at 11 and 5 a.m. and p.m. all week on the talkradio.org.uk stream, and over Sunday breakfast at Camberley'sRadioQUK.com. So we've been streaming live from the Eastone Studios on the talkradio.org.uk stream, at radioquk.com in Camberley, Surrey, DJ Plug Radio in Nuneaton, Warwickshire, and live on the Not the BCFM Politics Show app. If you can re-stream us live or rebroadcast us, just let me know and I'll credit you here. Have a relaxing and enjoyable weekend. Do please join us for Not the BCFM Politics Show next Friday at 5. And don't let the satanic banksters get you down.
to stand within the pleasure dome decreed by Kubla Khan, to taste anew the fruits of life, the last immortal man, find the sacred river realm, walk the caves of night. Oh, I will dine on honeydew and drink the milk of paradise. Oh, paradise. A thousand years have come and gone, but time has passed me by. Stars stopped in the sky, frozen in an everlasting view, waiting for the world to end, weary of the night, praying for the light, present of the lost, Xanadu. Held within the pleasure dome, decreed by Kubla Khan, to taste my bitter triumph as a mad immortal man. Never more shall I return, escape these caves of ice, for I have dined on honeydew and drunk the milk of paradise. Oh, Amen.